Moving on with our agenda, there a motion to approve our April minutes.
Oh,
Is there a second?
a second.
There's been a motion and a second. Any discussion? Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Dr. Hopkins has arrived.
After thinking and talking, starting off from Northfield, I had to stop and charge my electric car. And for some reason, it takes longer than they tell you. But I'm gonna be, and we're getting here. So, welcome everybody.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve our agenda for today? Is there a second? There's been a motion and a second to approve the agenda for today. Any discussion? Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Brian, are you ready?
Oh, thank you.
We're hiding. What's up?
Figure out where to scan. All right. Thanks. We've got a few odds and ends to talk about. It's been a busy summer here at the board. I'm going to give you kind of a broad overview. I've got some other speakers that are going to be going into a little more detail with some of our events and activities, but I already broke it, Aaron. Oh, different. It's quick enough. All right. This is what we've been dealing with at the board. So I talked to a lot of folks about this kind of an unprecedented time this year, this summer at the Minnesota Board of Animal Health, where we were dealing with basically three major diseases in our industries. Highly pathogenic avian influenza did not leave us this year. So this is the same event that began back in 2022 with some sporadic cases here and there. We had a busy fall last year, as you remember. Seemed like we were going to get some reprieve this spring. We hoped for some reprieve, and it circled back. So at the same time, the poultry industry was also dealing with avian metapneumovirus. So second fairly devastating disease that was compounding activities at in the poultry industry and as far as response to HPAI. Where it gets complicated is the aMPV was really complicating how we detected HPAI. So the disease is a great mimicker. So we saw a lot of cases that we were fired up expecting to be HPAI and came back as avian metapneumovirus. And then around March, we had H5N1, so the virus that causes highly pathogenic avian influenza being detected in some dairy cattle in Texas. Just a quick overview of that. This virus was considered a single spillover event. So the detection occurred from one case of a wild bird where the virus had changed and infected dairy cattle. From there, the dairy industry found exposure spreading just with cattle movement throughout the country. So we saw our first cases of this virus in dairy cattle in Minnesota in June. 9 cases in Minnesota. Nationwide, there were 14 states affected with 204 friends that were affected. The latest cases of dairy cattle being infected are in California. So over Labor Day weekend, they had their first 3 herds test positive and 3 additional cases since then. In addition to this, we recognize that some human cases were resulting from this, and our counterparts at the Department of Health will get into that a little bit more, but most of the cases, if not all the cases, were related to, I think most of the cases were related to individuals working on farms with known positive animals, either poultry or dairy. Something that's been interesting about the dairy event and really the poultry event is genomics. So this is something new this year where we're actually getting more of an indication of where this virus is coming from, how this virus is changing, what it's related to. It's basically fingerprinting the virus into cases and being able to correlate how they're connected. So be that one poultry farm to another or poultry and dairy farms, how the viruses are connected, and in a lot of cases the same. The response has been an interesting response. So this is a new disease. So this H5N1 disease, although it's the virus that causes highly pathogenic avian influenza in birds, this is new in the dairy industry. So the nation generally is learning how to approach this. It's not designated in the same way. So HPAI in poultry is considered a foreign animal disease. We have a lot of experience with that, a lot of response prep, and a lot of federal assistance with that. In the dairy industry, it's a little different. This isn't recognized as a foreign animal disease, and there's a litany of reasons why it hasn't been elevated to that level in that industry based on the USDA, but that changes how we respond because it's not the same. It's not a foreign animal disease. There's not the same type of eradication protocols mandated. So it's a learn as you go process, something similar to what was experienced in 2015 when HPAI first was found in the poultry industry. Vaccine candidates. So this is kind of the latest news out there. So what can we do? This has really brought the discussion about vaccination for highly pathogenic avian influenza back into the discussion. It has not been allowed in poultry because it affects trade. Foreign countries, our trading partners internationally have concerns about vaccinated products. So we have not been able to use this product in poultry, but with the virus now being found in dairy cattle and potentially other species, there's more discussion and more earnest going into coming up with a vaccine for those kinds of species. Right now, there's about 6 vaccine candidates that are out there waiting approval from USDA to do some trial runs. Just real quick on the avian metapneumovirus, and Shauna, I believe, will be getting a little more detailed on this. So, as I said, this kind of came to our shores, if you will, in Minnesota in spring of 24. We previously had cases of avian metapneumovirus back in, remind you, Shauna, it was late 1990s, early 2000s. Subtype C was what was in Minnesota. There was industry partnership to eradicate that. Some vaccines were developed to eliminate the virus, and we really haven't seen it since then. Spring of this year, we were starting to hear cases in the southeast and also the southwest, two different variations of this virus. So subtypes A and B were discovered, and eventually arrived in Minnesota with 4. So coinciding with our IPAF situation, and as I said, it really complicated how to diagnose, how to determine what virus was being dealt with. Avian metapneumovirus is another one of those situations that it's not our typical response like we have with highly pathogenic avian influenza. It's considered a reportable disease within the state of Minnesota, but not nationally. So that hinders again our response. We worked and relied heavily on the poultry industry to develop strategies to control this virus and determine how to manage it within the industry, and kind of subsided. And I was just talking to Jose this morning, and he said it looks like it's kind of rearing its ugly head again. It's been frustrating from our standpoint in Minnesota because it's affecting us more than other states. We have a lot more turkeys than other states, so it's not recognized nationally as devastating as it is here in Minnesota. There have been constant requests to allow us to use some vaccines that are already developed for these viruses. They would be foreign vaccines, so they would be coming from other countries, and there's concerns about that at the federal level. The regulations for importing those diseases are related to what other diseases are in those countries, how the vaccine is manufactured, killed versus live vaccine. So it's been a little bit difficult to get vaccines that are really effective. We do have some access to some killed vaccine that will have some effect on the virus, but it's still a work in progress, trying to develop more potent vaccines, maybe some domestic vaccines that would be more easily obtainable. Rabies has been a crazy year in Minnesota. So to date, 112 cases that have involved the Board of Animal Health. So whenever we get a report that there's been exposure to a potential rabies case, the board is sent out to investigate. This could mean animals that have been exposed to a bat. It could mean people that are exposed to an animal that hit them. There's a variety of conditions that trigger a response from the board to investigate. We had 7 positive or equivocal. So equivocal means it wasn't necessarily detected, but it's considered a positive case based on the signs and other detection. So 7 cattle cases, which is kind of unheard of in Minnesota. We've had, remind me, like maybe 1 or 2 a year would be expected. So 7 was pretty substantial. Also one positive feline case. Interesting, these rabies cases started early this year. I don't even feel like we had even a slowdown over the winter. It seemed like January, February, we were starting to see cases. Everyone's blaming the weather. It's good. The weather can't defend itself, so I guess we go with that. But some theories are that, a mild winter allowed some of the reservoir species, like skunks, to survive winter better and be able to spread the virus more. So rabies has kept our rabies folks extremely busy this year. And then just some odds and ends, things that it was part of this year or since our April meeting. So I had the opportunity to be on a panel with Commissioner Petersen. Lucas was on the panel, and I forget who else was there. It was a discussion about H5N1 in dairy cattle, the approach, the things that we're doing for surveillance, trying to get the dairy industry to do more testing so we can evaluate where this virus is. Very good discussion, and lots of great questions. Minnesota State Fair was kind of on our radar as far as what happens again with this H5N1 virus in dairy cattle. We established some testing protocols, requirements for lactating dairy cattle to be at the state fair. And we all breathed a collective sigh of relief when the Minnesota State Fair was done. It was a great state fair and fairly uneventful. Probably the biggest excitement was when 4-H Kids dry cow had a calf at the fair. So she was dry just long enough to show and then had a calf in there. This is kind of the season of conventions. So recently we had the National NPIP convention that Shauna attended. US SHIP was just in Bloomington last week that Dr. Jopp and myself were at. Last Friday, I had the opportunity to sit in on a meeting with Commissioner Petersen with the Uzbekistan trade delegation talking about agriculture in Minnesota. And actually, Dr. Holzbauer from the USDA and myself had an opportunity to visit after the meeting about how veterinary resources are used in Minnesota in the United States compared to Uzbekistan. So their approach to dealing with diseases is all government related. So they use government officials, government veterinarians. So they were very interested in how we partner with our private practice veterinarians to deal with disease. There's an international, it's actually the North American African Swine Fever Symposium going on right now up in Canada. Myself and Dr. Kaiser, the state vet from Iowa, were on a planning committee to plan speakers for that event. I was asked to speak at it, but it was today, so I had to decline. And then the last bullet point there is USDA, so United States Animal Health Association, has its annual meeting coming up in the middle of October. The 2 minutes is left sign, and I just have one slide left. Personnel updates. We have 2 vacancies right now that we are trying to fill. Our general counsel position is vacant again, so we are in the process of interviewing for that position. We also have a field veterinary position that is currently vacant that we are in the process of interviewing for. And then my last update is our companion animal program has a new program director, and that's Dr. Steve Fisto. We're happy to have him join the team and take on the companion animal program and all of the nuances with that program. That's it. Any questions?
Yes, he's gonna know if I'm moving.
Oh, yeah, actually, Steve, can you give a
Oh,
little,
there we go.
you give a little how we do it? How people we are.
Yes, I am Dr. Steve Fisto, so small animal practice for 27 years. The short 3-year hiatus teaching veterinary technology are now non-existent Minnesota School of Business. I'm pretty sure that was Dr. One stores me in that. But yeah, I've just been with the board now for 6 weeks, and I'm just gonna get my feet wet and here if any questions that would be pertain to companion animal medicine.
I'm sure. I've got a question about the password. I responded, I said, well, sort of say that the science there.
If anybody needs the password for Wi-Fi, do I need to pass it around? Sorry, Michelle, go ahead. No problem.
Good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Shauna Voss with the applications for the board and the president. So I'm just a quick sort of update. So you've heard, I'm sure we have this election coming up in November, in which our government is actually now producing candidates that can have some changes here in Minnesota. Let's quickly go over that. So if Governor Jones does become the VP, then Lieutenant Governor Flanagan will then become the governor. So we keep leadership, she would stay. So he will stay in his position most likely until after the election. If he becomes the VP, then he resign his seats and then she would step into that. So just that succession, and that's how it can play here. And a little bit of update. Currently as well, we still have the trifecta, as they call it, so the DFL leadership in the governor's office, as well as in the Senate. That could change essentially during this election, so we'll see how that pans out. And then too, with this election, there could be changes to committee leadership as well as committee makeup. So the membership could change on the different committees in the legislature. But again, we won't know until after election, as we go to the next session. Speaking of next session, it will start on Tuesday, January 14th, so not that far. This is a budget year, so we're doing the fiscal year 26-27 triennial budget. So that's the base budget where we get all the funding we need for our organization. As a reminder, our state budget operates on a 2-year cycle, so there's 2 fiscal years at a time. The fiscal year begins on July 1 and ends on June 30th of the following year. So, for example, fiscal year 2024 started on July 1 of 2023 and ending on July 30th. June 30th, 2020. And beginning begins on July 1 of. So So primarily it's a budget year, but it's also a policy year. So also we have a lot of policy for this next session. And we expect as well that bonding will come up again. So they did try to get the bond bill passed last session, but it missed the final vote in the Senate by a couple of seconds. So the bond bill did not pass, and that money was likely to be available. And there'll be a lot of things that we thought were bonding. The Board of Animal Health, all of your policy budget is within the Department of Ag's budget, this is the agriculture bill. So all of your base funding comes from there, and all your policy will be on to the Department of Ag. So that's where all of that's going. So I work with the staff to develop your policy budget proposals and then submit them through all the processes to get to session. So the policy is kind of organized by the governor's office, and then the budget is organized by municipal management budget or aMPV. Takes two separate processes that we're already working on that in that session. These are pretty good. So we're working on it, developing with the business. Now this will be a session. So last meeting, so there were some questions about board member confirmations. As you remember, you guys all came in front of the Senate Ag Committee last session, but and you were recommended to go to the floor or be appointed, but that never happened. Didn't get to the floor. So I did check in with the Boards and Commissions office, and they let me know that if an appointment requires the advice and consent of the Senate, but the Senate does not act, they're automatically appointed. So you all are automatically appointed in your positions. So as far as Senate approval, the Senate takes action on a very small percentage of appointments, and not many actually get appointed. So for your roles and in our rules or statutes, you don't need to be approved by the Senate to stay in the role. Some boards do require that. So for our board, you will all stay, nothing changes. Additionally, if the governor changes, your appointment also stays. So if the lieutenant governor becomes the governor, you still stay your position on the board. So nothing will change for this year as far as that is. The next opening we'll have, or the next board member that will come to end of their term is Dr. Fox. January of 2025. The others are January 26, 27, and 28. So you kind of staggered their membership. So there's that. And then I did also check in with Senator Putnam to see if you guys were happy with the Ag Committee again. And he said no. He don't take to move forward again with that one time if you're not was hoping. I was very close to getting you guys confirmed in the Senate. But there was some political things that happened there that didn't allow you guys to go forward, but we can do it and your friend, but it doesn't matter because their inaction means that you're already. There's just nothing more to do with that. So those are all the updates I have. Any questions on anything?
All right, thank you, Michelle. The Board of Vet Medicine review. Job, is she online? She.
I'm here.
Go ahead, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Okay, I've shared your presentation. Can you see it?
Yes, I can see it. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm Dr. Pam Johnson. I'm the new Executive Director of the Minnesota Board of Veterinary Medicine. So I've just gave a kind of a brief update here on what the board's actions have been over the last quarter or summer. So our mission obviously is to promote, preserve, protect the public health, safety, welfare by effective control and regulation of the practice of veterinary medicine. So the practice of veterinary medicine includes all of the regulatory requirements for what goes into the licensing requirements, the standard of care, facility sanitations, things such as that. A big part of our job is we respond to inquiries, complaints, and provide reports to the public and the government agencies on licensing applications and other misconduct situations. So I just gave a brief overview of the number of applications we've had so far this year, 187. New licensees issued, so mainly the new licensees, a large percentage of that would be your new graduates from veterinary school. To date, we've had 163. Current open applications, 46, so we're on track for beating the number of applicants that we had last year, which was 206. Last year, we had 111 complaints filed with the board, and to date, we have 93, so we're on track for exceeding that number compared to last year. In 2023, we dismissed 63 complaints. So far as to date, we've dismissed or closed 64 complaints total. So major activities during this quarter, a big thing that happened is we had the omnibus bill that was passed, and that put into statute language for veterinary technician licensing and also the institutional licensing. So within that bill, it defines what direct supervision means for a veterinarian. This could really impact the veterinary community when we get the licensed veterinary technician.
Pam, are you there?
Yeah,
We can barely hear you. Can you talk louder?
I'm sorry. Do I have to start over or?
There we go. Now
you're back. Okay, I'll just start over with the major activities during the quarter. So we had the omnibus bill that was passed in the last legislative session, which allows for licensing of veterinary technicians, and also it introduces a new institutional licensing category for the University of Minnesota. It also defines what direct supervision is, gives title recognition to licensed veterinary technician. It defines what remote supervision is, which hopefully will take some of the strain off of the veterinary shortages or workload in remote areas where you could have now remote supervision of licensed veterinary technicians going out to do some wellness or follow-up checks on patients. So the veterinary technician and license renewal statute will take effect July 1 of 2026, and the institutional licensure will take effect July 1 of next year. There was also the retirement of the former executive director, Dr. Julia Wilson. Where we developed a rulemaking task force for the licensed veterinary technicians. So we're going through the rulemaking process for that license category. The board is also overhauling its data management practices. We're moving to more of a paperless system for tracking complaints and licensing. We're also updating our website, and we've created a social media page so we can do a better job of actually communicating with the public. For the financial part of the board update, we're going through our biennial budget right now. And the board is anticipating we're going to be in a budget deficit for 2025. So we're anticipating a fee increase across the board for various types of fees, to include licensing fees, renewal fees, application fees. And then I just gave a quick synopsis of the board members. We have 5 licensed veterinarians and 2 public members on the board. None of these members are up for renewal in the next year, so we're set on that. with the institution, or I'm sorry, with the initiation of the licensed veterinary technician, we do anticipate to expand the board by 2 members, and one of them would be a licensed veterinary technician. So that's all I have for updates. If there's any questions, I'll take them.
Dr. Johnson, with the technician licensing, I understand that they'll be more expensive, but they'll also be more income from those licenses. Is that not correct?
Yes, that there will be income, which will cover, we'll have to hire another employee for the office staff here just to manage. There's a large number of applicants for the licensed veterinary technicians, so we're anticipating having to hire somebody to help with that workload. So we are a self-funded organization, so all of our budget comes from fees, so we have to operate under the statutes and not to collect more than we can put into reserve. So we'll look closely at what the fees will be for the licensed veterinary technicians and make that accordingly.
Are there any other questions? I don't see any questions here. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Good morning, everyone. This is my first time at the Creamery. I'm really enjoying it, and I think it's a great thing. I'd like to come at the family later. This is my 3rd quarterly meeting, so I've been here for the last 7 months. My name is Hemant Naikare, and I moved to Minnesota from Georgia in February. So I have a few slides to give an update since the last quarterly meeting. So, sure. The Minnesota Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratories, we have 2 labs in the state. The lab in Wilmer, which is pretty close from here, about 30-40 minutes drive, and then the lab in St. Paul. And so I'm the lab director for the labs. In the next 10-12 minutes, I just wanted to give an update on these 5 different items. Go over the personal updates, some key changes or key positions that we are looking for. Kind of go over the case code metrics in the fiscal year 2024. The fiscal year ended June 30, 2024. So what sort of trends did we see in the state, nationally, and then what were the clients that we serve internationally as well? And then I'll cover some of the emerging diseases and the diagnostic caseload. A lot of this is an overlap, and there will be a lot of things covered as well after my talk. So I'll try to be brief, but there are at least 3 diseases I'll mention about. And then the projects that have been completed since the last quarterly meeting, this is a lot of work in progress. So in the last 3 months, what we've been doing, and then what are the projects in the pipeline? So these are the 5 different things I want to cover. On key position updates, unfortunately, we have the poultry diagnostician position still open. It got vacated sometime in 2023. We had our first round of interviews, and first search, I would say, was unsuccessful. And so the committee has got back together and got new applications. So hopefully, sometime soon, the interviews, the process of interviewing should start. So we are looking for, this was a position which primarily was in Wilmer lab. And so we are looking for a pathologist / diagnostician. We lost a pathologist food animal diagnostician. This is unfortunate because, the industry, it's a pay market demand supply kind of a deal. So we lost a food animal diagnostician end of June. And so we have just advertised for that position. That would be primarily serving food animal plants, swine, and dairy, and all the others. We were successful in hiring some of our IT positions. We just filled in an application developer position in summer and a database analyst. And both of these positions are going to, will kind of help us to strengthen our LIMS system, the lab information management software, as well as our ability to serve our stakeholders in a better way, whether it is online accessioning and automation. So that's about these two positions, and it will also help us with our succession planning. We are anticipating a retirement of our guru who was dealing with our LIMS system. So we're just looking into either we strengthen the current LIMS or look into other options. Next, I'd like to go over some of the caseload metrics in this last fiscal year. So our lab is a full service lab, and within the laboratories, we serve all animal species. So within the laboratory, we have all of these different sections, whether it is bacteriology, clinical pathology, histology, necropsy. So I won't go over all of these, but between all of these sections, over 800,000 tests were conducted annually. And we also sent out some of the tests to other labs. But overall, these 800,000 tests were done for different species, primarily for three reasons, either for diagnostics on sick animals or for surveillance, active surveillance, passive surveillance, and also for regulatory reasons. So, over 839,000 tests were done. Compared to last fiscal year, it is a decrease in the caseload. Part of it is the industry, as well as, economics, everything plays a role in it. But we are operating pretty lean as well. So while we have had a decrease in caseload, we are also being able to sustain it because we are also working with fewer people. So that is where we are. So what these cases came from all the 87 counties in the state. And that is the beauty of the VDL. We serve every single county. The slate counties, please ignore that box. For some reason, the software was thinking that we had no cases from Lake County, but really we had cases from all the counties. And for each county, if you see there is a number listed, that indicates the number of cases we received from those counties. Our top 5 counties that we serve, where we are from Stearns County, as well as Morrison, Hennepin, Nicollet, and Martin. So these are the 5 different top counties that we have served in the last fiscal year. Now, besides serving our stakeholders from the state of Minnesota, we've also been receiving samples, and we do testing for almost every single state in the country. So we are truly a national lab. Of course, a lot of samples are coming from our neighboring states, and also like the top 5 states that we have been doing testing besides Minnesota would be North Carolina, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Indiana. About 25,000 cases are coming from Minnesota, and about 10,000 cases from our state. So about 35,000 cases make up for 850,000 tests that we have done in the last fiscal year. This shows not only the testing done in North America by us, but also we receive samples from Central America, from South America, from Europe, a few cases from Spain, and then we had one submission from China as well. So these are the different countries that we use examples from. And we talked about the international Uzbekistan delegation that was here, was just last week. So they also came to the laboratory, and so we hosted them. This is another opportunity for the VDL to actually help, build the other VDLs in the rest of the country and the rest of the world. I want to switch gears and cover some of the emerging diseases and diagnostic case notes that we have seen. We talked about high fat, and it's going on since 2022. The VDL and the NPTL lab together, we've done over 7,000 PCR tests. That includes the test for the matrix gene and the H5 gene and some of them H7 genes. This is the national picture, and it's almost like almost 48 states. The labs in 48 states have been activated, and more than 10,000 detections have come from the wild bird surveillance as well. So this is as of September 12th. In case of high fat detection from livestock, which is primarily cattle, we have had 207 confirmed cases. And since we started doing the testing, I think somewhere around April or May in our state, we have conducted over 131 PCR tests. And, what you're seeing over here, the dark blue shaded states are the ones which have had a positive in the last 30 days. We didn't have one in our state. So those which are light blue shaded are the ones which didn't have a positive for the last 30 days. So we are kind of busy concurrently testing for high fat in chicken as well as in livestock. And further complicated by FY24, we have been doing avian metapneumovirus testing. As Dr. Hoefs mentioned about the types A, B, and C. So type C we have not detected it recently. It was in the late 90s. But type A and type B, currently the lab offers all diagnostic platforms. We do virus isolation, we do antibody detection, and we also do PCR testing. So far, we have conducted over 16,000 tests. And, this is by itself, the viruses causes immunosuppression will not be as bad, but it can cause a lot of comorbidities with other bacteria and virus presence. So there's a lot that needs to be done. We are trying our best to apply for some applied research funding to continue with the avian metapneumovirus diagnostics. And then, a little bit about the projects that we completed in the last 3 months. Since I joined the lab, I just highlighted a few tests that we are doing. We started doing chronic wasting disease. That's the immunohistochemistry test. We used to offer that some time back, and then we had stopped it for a variety of reasons, but we got it back. And so we are doing it since this July. We're doing the Francisella tularensis tularemia testing. And then I've just listed 2 other PCR tests that we're doing for the swine industry, primarily the porcine lymphotropic herpes virus. This is a test a lot of organ transplant related and therapeutic related companies are requesting. So we are serving that clientele. We heard from our stakeholders at the annual meeting that they would like us to offer a pulse differentiation PCR. And so we are offering the pulse differentiation PCR to differentiate the 2 vaccines of the wild type, the Prevacent and the Engelbrecht vaccines. So we've been doing those tests as well. I want to also cover a little bit about the client survey that we did. The last client survey we did was in 2017, and I think we didn't have a lot of success with it for whatever reasons. And then we had the pandemic, so we really did not have a chance to do any surveys. And so I didn't know, I'm coming from another state, so we thought of creating a baseline. So we conducted a survey in June this year, and we got close to 104 responses. We reached out to about 2,000 clients, and from these 104 responses, it was pretty good. Like you can see, we had from swine industry, cattle, cats and dogs, sheep and goat, poultry, horses, wildlife, and some amount of research and other species as well. So these are the folks who took the survey, and this in a way reflects the kind of cases we are receiving at the lab as well. And the responses, I'm just trying to share a few highlights. So overall, the satisfaction with the lab services, if you categorize, if you club the excellent and the good together, it's about 81%. So 4 out of 5 respondents think that we did a good job or an excellent job. We want to aim for 100%, but at least, we can't get there immediately, but hopefully in the next few years with our operation plan, we would like to get there. There's always a concern about fees, so we always want to be very cautious and don't want to go up on fees, but to offset our cost with inflation and, with the salary hikes and all. So we always wonder, are we charging appropriately? And this is what our respondents said, that more than 80% of them feel that we do charge about right. So, very recently, on July 15th, we had to do a fee hike. It was not across the board. We spent a lot of time to look at things, and we were very careful of not going up on high volume tests to support our livestock industry. On an average, it was still about 4% of fee hike. That helps us offset our expenses, with the increase in salaries and inflation. Lastly, I wanted to show on the survey side, would our clients come back to us or not? So more than 85% of them said yes. About less than 20% said that they may think about it. So this shows that folks believe in what we are doing and they want us to come back and use our services. This is another initiative which we just started, looking at, we got a survey feedback. What can we do now to improve our client satisfaction rates? So we just drafted our FY25 operational plan. I've tried to summarize it in one slide, call it a small acronym as a direct. So looking at diversification of our services, primarily our core is swine and turkey and poultry. We also do, companion animals and food animals such as cattle. So we want to enhance our services, but also, expand it to the companion animal segment. We are surrounded by 1 million pets in the Twin Cities, and hopefully we can serve a little bit more on the companion animal side that brings in revenue and that helps us subsidize, offset our food animal testing. That's the goal. Being innovative, trying to see how we bundle our services and offer new testing platforms. Try to look into more research dollars with applied research, developing new tests. Primarily looking at funding from USDA or NIH. Currently, we are only 5% of our budget is coming from our fees, from the grants. And so I'm trying to, increase our funding from competitive grants to at least 10%. We've been trying to be more entrepreneurial and engaging with our employees, trying to explore new markets, increase our out-of-state submissions, because almost 70% of our budget, 2/3 of our budget is fee dependent, and we need those funds. So looking into being more entrepreneurial and also engaging with our employees so that we have good employee retention. So we're trying to promote more teamwork and cooperation. The last two alphabets are the C for client centered, trying to be more client focused, trying to get more feedback from the people we serve, and then the hospitals and the research units around us. And finally, T is for tracking, so that we are able to define timelines. Everything that we try is not going to work. So just keeping an account of it and then writing in our annual reports. Hopefully, I can give some summary of our FY24 annual report in our last quarterly meeting. 2 minutes there? Sure. Finally, I have 2 minutes to go, and I just have 2 slides to cover. So these are the projects in pipeline. So this is, we have, by the end of this month, we have our accreditation site visit. Every 5 years, an external body comes in and sees, and they kind of endorse our quality. So we are having a site visit on September 29th to October 4th. We are looking into a digital and physical infrastructure assessments. And the reason to do this is we want to stay sustainable. We want to stay there for a whole number of years and we want to be relevant. So what needs to be done for us to be sustainable is what we are trying to assess. Also trying to conduct mapping of current and future plans. So it's basically we're trying to build a database of our plans and in all the 87 counties that we serve. And that will help us to explore, can we do a better job with our courier logistics? Maybe we have collection centers in the rest part of in other parts of the state because we only have two places. We have labs in Wilbur and in Paul, and that doesn't really cover the whole state. We're trying to look into that aspect. And then, as I mentioned earlier, trying to get more applied research projects to happen, through funding from grant applications. We are applying for funding for biosecurity, for HPAI from Livestock. We have been looking at for avian metapneumovirus. So anything that can help us to stay at the cutting edge, we're looking at that. And then finally, on the digital side, these are our needs. We really need to have a high-quality slide scanner and a cloud storage capability. We struggle with that. Our own scanner is not working that well. Just looking at $500,000 to make those changes. And then making some improvement to our LIMS, which is close to $1 million. And then having some web conferencing facility and upgrades at both the labs. So these are our current infrastructure needs that we know and find ways to fund it. So if you know some places who would like to fund or have any ideas, please know. With that, thank you for your attention and for having me minute to answer any questions.
Any questions for Dr. Naikare?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Petersen, are you ready? You've done a lot of really cool things for the state of Minnesota, so I'm super excited to have you here and thanks to social media, we get to see all of it.
Well, thank you. I'll stand up too. And really, first, thanks Lucas and Elise for having us here today. It's really, I think it's great too when we can have this meeting out in outstate Minnesota and I really appreciate this venue and value added agriculture. When we think about animal agriculture in our state, I think that's always been a high priority of our administration and previous administrations. Today, in fact, I'm leaving a little bit, headed to Waubun, Minnesota. There's a new beef processing plant there that was built with grants from the USDA and MDA that serves a very important piece up there. We knew beef processing was a big problem at that small scale. And so when we think back to COVID and all the issues that many of us in this room went through, Minnesota got hit the hardest, especially on processing. We realized that that was, a big issue. So it's great to go there and see that new plant up and running. When I'm coming back tomorrow from Northwest Minnesota, I'll be in Wilmer. A lot of Wilmer connections here today. In Wilmer, they're doing a groundbreaking tomorrow for a new halal sheep and goat processing plant. That is something we've been working on for a long time. That'll help serve the growing, whether it's a Somali community, a Latino community, but it provides a lot of opportunities for processing for small ruminants. So when we think about, the livestock industry in Minnesota, it can be complicated sometimes. The best thing about Minnesota, I always say, is how well our cash and crops balance. And so when you think about a lot of states don't have quite the balance we have. You can say roughly $10 billion of crops or livestock or grain every year in sales. That really varies, but in general, it could be one or the other. Crops have had a lot of good years. We might see that flip this year just because of crop prices, but in general, we balance really nicely. And if you think about trade, and that was what I was going to touch on a little bit today, 20% of those livestock markets leave our country. And so very important. And again, these are kind of averages on an average year. And so it's very important that we do that. Of course, Mexico and Canada are top partners. We spend a lot of time with them. We spend a lot of time, trade, is not a surprise, but trade is all about relationships. A lot of you belong to whether the people that are associated with farms in here are associated with commodity groups, but we build those relationships over time. We work to maintain those relationships. We're lucky in Minnesota to have both a Canadian consulate and a Mexican consulate right here, and spend time with both of them in the last week. And we work on a lot of different issues. Trucking is a huge issue for livestock. And so when we have issues, you think about COVID and truck strikes and everything else. Now we may be looking at another strike. And so we always want to go and work on keep those things negotiated, handling. Canada, is really one of our bigger partners. Pork is a big piece of that, where we bring in anywhere from over 500,000 to 1 million piglets a year. I was honored to host the Manitoba Commissioner, Agriculture Commissioner at our state fair this year. And I got to walk him around the farm, around the fair and to the barns, and it's pretty fun. I also hosted the UK ambassador, a group from Indonesia, and they're very interested, but I always love it because they'll start in the fair and we'll be at like the top and haven't even got up to the barns and everything and see how much we have to show off. And so, but that's a lot of things that I do as commissioner, is host a lot of delegations. We said we hosted in Uzbekistan this week. We do trade missions through the department. We were supposed to go to Amsterdam in Ireland in November, but we'll see what's going to happen with that with the governor. And those are the governors. Usually he leads a mission or two a year. Last year he went to Japan, Australia, very into Japan, a big market for us. But back to the Netherlands, kind of interesting as we've been looking and putting that trip together. Really, we're looking at crops there. The ports there in Amsterdam, Rotterdam, those are like really big ports for us to send stuff to anywhere in the world on that side of the ocean. But we're kind of, I kind of wanted to put together a little side trip in the Netherlands too, to talk about animal agriculture. Because if you followed what's happened there in Europe, they've kind of had some issues there. And so we kind of wanted to meet with some of their cattle groups to kind of get that feeling of the dairy and the beef, and how do we, when we are looking at things like greenhouse gases and other things, how do we coexist with agriculture, but not, in my mind, sometimes go too far where we're forcing people out and everything. So that's a kind of a side note. But the European market, incredibly important. Like I said, we host the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is interesting for the livestock market because they want to export beef to us, and we do import some beef to them. Not a lot, but a lot of times we're not just exporting, we're also looking at importing different cuts or qualities or cattle that they have. They have interesting breeding operations or things that we look at there too as well. A couple other things I just wanted to mention. The Asian market for cattle is obviously very important. You think about Japan, South Korea, big markets, not a surprise there. Well, what I've really learned in my trips is looking at the Southeast Asia. So think Philippines, Malaysia, Bangladesh, all of those countries, the population, the average age is in the early 20s. When you look at the other parts of Asia, what are big markets, China, Japan, South Korea, they're into their late 30s and even 40s. So we look at what's going to happen there. Those are developing nations. They're becoming more middle class. More middle class means they buy more protein. More, and so it provides those opportunities for us into those marketplaces. The department, with help from some of the commodity groups, we have an office in Taiwan, which we help serve that market. It's very, very helpful and effective for our companies in Minnesota and our folks that are doing business there. So that's an important piece there too as well. And we'll continue to work on those markets as we go forward. And then just thinking about Africa too is another one. We host a lot of groups from Africa. And it's interesting, Africa are a really developing nation. We went to Morocco. Morocco is one we've been working on with our ports, because their ships fit into our ships. They have things that we want, very important piece. But I went to Morocco and Cuba on almost just a couple of weeks difference late this spring. And it was really interesting to look at what is happening in Morocco is they're also becoming, a middle-class society. I could be in Rabat or Casablanca, and I thought I was in Medina in certain places when I was driving around. But to see their diet changing and things like that. The problem is, what I thought was interesting is a lot like us, their beef herd is shrunk. Same with Cuba, where they've lost with drought and other things. Their beef herd is really shrunk, so that people have switched a lot to a cheaper protein, which is poultry. And so those are good markets for us. As we look at that, was very interesting. They also have implemented in both of those countries like a heifer protection program, so that you're keeping your heifers, and they have a plan to build their herds back up, which I thought was really interesting. But what I noticed, and I've been arguing with Secretary Vilsack about this some too, but I think the world is changing on the vaccines quite a bit for IPATH and things like that, because they have to. They have it too. They've been aware of it, those type of countries. And they need poultry, right? They need poultry as a low cost, and that's something that they can raise. It'd be great if we could export more of that, but, I think that's gonna change because it has to. And so, so I think that's something we'll have to keep an eye out and keep moving towards as we develop vaccines and things like that. So very interesting to see those type of markets as they develop. Africa, I'd just say we spend a lot of time more and more with the African nations. The issue is money and getting our products there. So we'll see what happens. And then last, I'd say, we're kind of bullish on India is another one. India just opened up their turkey market to the United States, and we changed some of our tariff rules. And as we look at those type of things, as we try to, promote more turkey production. And so I close with the other thing, since we're on a dairy farm, we do a lot of meetings with our trade partners on corn and soybeans. That's just, we're a big corn and soybean state. By the way, we're a top 5 exporter of all the states in the nation. And I do USDA trade missions quite a bit. I just got invited on another mission while I was sitting here. And it is always interesting because they really want a Midwest commissioner to go with the USDA. And I'm going to say this, they don't always want like the Arkansas commissioner or the Utah commissioner. They really want Iowa or Minnesota or one of the Dakotas. But dairy is really becoming, as diets change, we see a lot more interest in dairy imports. And so we see whether it's aMPI, we're talking with them, and that Shake Shack has really grown in China, and all the cheese slices on their cheeseburgers are all from Minnesota, and so we think about Doritos and First District and the cheese dust and everything kind of going all over the world. So, but more and more Caseinate and different things like that are coming back up as the interest in those diets change. So I just feel, hopefully that gives you a quick snapshot of kind of what we do at the Department of Agriculture. I really appreciate the partnership that we have with the board. I think it's a good day when I don't have to talk to Brian or check in with him, but Brian and I check in quite regularly, even if there's not something going on. A lot of times, I'm out and about, get asked about the situations that we've been having the last couple of years, and able to, work with Brian, refer to him. I appreciate the partnerships that we have in this room because it helps us get through a lot. I can tell you, when I'm at my national meetings, we'll be there next week with all our commissioners. People appreciate the way that our state handles our outbreaks and things that we have to go through, including our university system, and they want to know how we do that and things like that. So I just want to take the opportunity to visit with you a little bit today, and I'll stay for a little bit longer. But thanks, Erik, for having me today. Thank you.
Can I ask you two questions?
Yeah.
All right, so the first question is, once you establish those new markets, how do you maintain those relationships? What does that look like? And then the second question is kind of Turkey specific. But there's, in like India is an example, when you establish those new markets, like for Turkey, a lot of times people in those countries, they don't have like the knowledge of how to prepare turkey, or they don't have, for example, these oven space to like cook the whole turkey. So what does you establish those new markets, and then what does kind of the education like follow?
Yeah, and one thing I didn't mention, so like one thing that's happening right now with relationships is the Philippines actually, as we look at, when we have IFAD, then the goal is maybe not going to maybe eradicate it, but we want to control it and assure our trading partners that we have control. And the Philippines right now has a ban on imports of Minnesota poultry. And so that's one of our relationships. So we're trying to work on that relationship. I've been there, they've been here. They have a partnership with the University of Minnesota Vet School. And so I've been working through the U.S. Trade Office to get that lifted. Hopefully that'll happen soon. But that is, again, another one where we have people we can talk to and say, hey, here's what we're doing. They didn't do it necessarily in other states. And so this is, an important piece, but a lot of it is, so maintaining those relationships for people that you can contact and have. The other thing that I have really learned as commissioner on trade missions is how important the commodity groups that are like secondary to the U.S. Grains Council, the U.S. Meat Federation. When we go to those countries, these in-market reps usually join us, and they do really good work. So I can see firsthand on the trips I've been there. For example, when we were in Morocco, the Grains Council employs a former professor from the university to show them how they use the meal, and soybean meal at all the different poultry. We went to all poultry plants. And so that was a great piece to see. But they all called him professor, like they all knew him. And people that are very strategic about buying that. Same thing with the meat export council. It is very, in the poultry export council, those are really important pieces to continue to invest in as associations, I think, because it's, it's hard for us to show like how to do it. But working with those through the USDA, they're also funded through the USDA. That's why a farm bill is so important. People always say, oh, we're going to do a farm bill. The trade programs in the farm bill are incredibly important. And we put more dollars into that. But those programs that help fund learning are also funded through the farm bill. So that's kind of my critique on that.
Are there any other questions for Commissioner Petersen? All right, thank you for your time. Next up on our agenda, do we have Amy Green?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
All right. I have a presentation to give, and let's see if I can present it in Teams. If it will let me. Well, just to kind of start while my slides are loading. Hello, my name is Dr. Amy Green. I am currently the acting area veterinarian in charge for the state of Minnesota. I'm here for the rest of the week, so thank you for inviting me and having me. Once my detail is done, I will go back to my normal job with the USDA, which is the area epidemiologist for the state of South Dakota. I'm currently based in Pierre, South Dakota, quite a ways away from you folks, so thank you for letting me join virtually. Can you see my slides?
Yes, yes.
All right. Okay. Forgive me, I've never presented in Teams before, and now I can't find how to rotate through my slides.
It should just look like normal PowerPoint.
All right, I think I got it. It was taking, forgive me, my network connection is also very slow because I'm very remote. All righty. I think we're up and running. Looks like it. So the first part of the USDA update that I will be presenting will concern the NAM Sheep 2024 National Animal Health Monitoring System. For those of you who aren't aware, the NAM Sheep 2024 study, or any NAM study, is something USDA does every year just to kind of gather some baseline data on symptoms or diseases that might be occurring in the U.S. that would be of importance to United States producers. This year in 2024, the study subject was sheep. And I want to give a special shout out to Mackenzie Reberg and Amanda Doran for being co-coordinators and spearheading that project in Minnesota. And also thank you, Dr. Reberg, for the use of her slides. The workload projection and study timeline. So field staff questionnaires and biologics collections proceeded from April through September of 2024. All of the states in blue are states that participated in the study. Quite a few states have sheep. Minnesota has quite a few as well, and many states participated. For just the state of Minnesota, 36 total farms were turned over to participate in the NAM sheep study. 21 questionnaires so far have been completed, 6 are scheduled, 16 biologics have been completed, 7 biologics have been scheduled, and 6 declined to participate. We had really good participation in the study this year, and we are still collecting samples this week and next. For those of you who might not be familiar, this is quite a lengthy questionnaire that we go over with producers. We ask them a lot of questions about their sheep farms, what kind of production systems that they have. The biologics that are collected include enteric microbes, GI parasites, blood, and interdigital swab samples. And we actually turn these test results over back to the producers so that they can better help manage like what diseases or what problems do they have present in their herd, and what courses of actions to take next. I wanted to thank everybody in Minnesota for their support in this study. It was quite a large study, and I know a lot of people worked very hard on it. The second part of my presentation will be concerning the National Scrapie Eradication Program. Special thanks to Dr. Linda Detweiler from National Scrapie staff for the use of her slides. This slide predicts the programmatic changes since the first case of scrapie in the United States. Scrapie's been around for a very long time. First case in the United States, 1947 in Michigan. Since then, the Scrapie Eradication Program started in 1952. The last positive case of scrapie in the United States was in 2021. So the goal of the Scrapie Eradication Program is to eradicate scrapie, the transmissible spongiform encephalopathy, from the United States. Once that disease can be considered eradicated, it opens up a lot of opportunities for export and trade. This slide depicts the states that are free of classical scrapie for the more than 7 years. Arkansas still had, that's the one with the most recent case. So we still got a few states that are hanging on there, but for the most part, we're looking pretty good. The status of the current eradication program, like I said, our most recent case was in 2021. Most likely that sheep came from Arkansas. June 2019, we had a goat in Indiana found positive at slaughter. And 2018 in Pennsylvania, we had a few. Given that, our scrapie surveillance goals for the upcoming year, fiscal year 2025, we're moving from 40,000 to 30,000 total samples collected nationwide. So that's good. This satisfies WOA standards, and it's consistent with our comments to WOA on appropriate surveillance levels. RSSS, for those of you who might not be familiar with all of the government acronyms, is our scrapie slaughter surveillance program. Don't ask me what RSSS stands for right now. It's not coming to me. It's random scrapie slaughter surveillance, I think. So basically, slaughter plants all across the US randomly collect heads and turn in those tissues for scrapie sampling. This year, Minnesota beat out their minimums, did really well in the numbers. And I will say again, RSSS collections, really important nationwide. Thank you to everybody in Minnesota who helps with that. Minnesota has been instrumental in collecting RSSS samples, not just for your state, Minnesota, but also for other states across the country. And without you, a lot of other states would be in a lot of trouble. So thank you so much for all that you do. Any questions?
I don't see any questions here.
Alrighty, well, thank you so much. Short and sweet.
Thank you. Stacy. All right, I think we're still in morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. My name is Stacy Holzbauer. I'm the state public health veterinarian at the Minnesota Department of Health, and we so appreciate the board allowing us to be part of the meeting. And especially this year, I want to thank everyone in this room for being such great partners to our Zoom audit unit at the Minnesota Department of Health. It's been an interesting summer. Thank you. So I'll plan to walk through a few things. I think this one. Right. Try that again. My kids accused me of being technology at first, so. Great. We could plug it in. Oh, you should have. Oh. That would be the. Is this one? Okay. Probably sometimes. Thank you, Erin, for so I just wanted to chat a bit about influenza A, H5N1, and then briefly to the days here next week, which is this week. In case you all didn't have that marked on your calendar. So just to start off with H5N1 and review where the Department of Health fits into the animal response. So the Board of Animal Health and our Department of Agriculture colleagues lead the response, and we support their efforts by providing public health recommendations and monitor human health. And so we interview poultry and dairy workers and responders for their work duties, flock contacts, PPE usage, and illness history. But we're integrated into the response, so we have privy to the positive herds or flock information, and our MDH recommendations are included in the packets that the case managers provide to owners. And so we've worked with our poultry industry for many, many years to be part of their response, and we're getting to know our dairy friends very well. So thank you, Lucas, for being that inroads into your research. And so just to review, the PPE recommendations are when folks are exposed to this virus, and we're most concerned about those that have occupational exposure, are gloves, goggles, and 95 masks, coveralls, and boots. And while those are the recommendations, we know that implementing those recommendations can sometimes be hard, especially considering the work that folks are doing responding to this virus. And so we initiate active surveillance for respiratory symptoms. That's what we're most concerned about, folks who are exposed, and we monitor them. And anyone who reports any concerning symptoms to us, we ask them to voluntarily get tested, and we work with our vaccine preventable diseases branch to do the influenza surveillance. And so they're the ones who are responsible for testing. And so what we've established in the state is that the monitoring is voluntary.
But that is a decision that has to be made by the individual. And so we ask the owners of the farms who are employing people to give us the list. And that has worked well with the poultry industry, and that's also what we've done with the industry. And so we reach out, and people can choose to ignore us, or they can refuse, or they can ignore it. And so, as mentioned earlier, this response has actually been going on since 2022. And so we have monitored people associated with 172 positive flocks and 9 dairy herds. We've reported there's been over 2,300 exposures that have been reported to the Department of Health, including over 2,000 poultry exposures, 118 dairy exposures, and 11 companion animal exposures. And currently, we have 2 people in monitoring. So, great job. And just to review our dairy worker monitoring, because this was a new industry that we were working with this year, we have 118 people referred. 53% of those people agreed to be interviewed, and of which 91 had an exposure to positive herb. 39 of those people responded to at least one monitoring survey following their interview, and 47% of the people that we interviewed were in Spanish. We have native Spanish speakers that we employ to help with those interviews. And unlike our poultry monitoring, where we usually have a very, in comparison, a short monitoring period of 10 days following their last exposure, and because the animal response is so efficient at the depopulation efforts, it's a short period of time that we're following these folks. We do not have that experience with dairy. And so our longest monitoring period that we're reaching out to people daily, asking them about symptoms, is currently 92 days, and that is ongoing. So that is a long time for someone to be getting a text message from the Department of Health asking, hey, how are you doing? But we've made friends, so that's good. So 73 people since 2022 have reported symptoms, and testing was recommended. So this includes poultry workers, dairy workers, and our responders responding to this outbreak. We've tested 47 poultry workers, 2 dairy workers, and 1 veterinary technician. No human infections of H5N1 were detected. However, 34% of those 47 did have a seasonal respiratory pathogen detected. So SARS-CoV-2, COVID, and seasonal coronaviruses, so just your common cold and rhinovirus, were the most common pathogens that we detected. So we do test for other pathogens so we can help give people a sense of what's going on. In May, we were asked by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in response to the dairy infections to provide personal protective equipment to essentially any workers that would have the possibility of being exposed to this virus. And so we worked with our response colleagues to access PPE that's available in the Strategic National Stockpile. And so we offered N95 respirators, safety goggles, nitrile gloves, and face shields to anyone who worked in dairy and poultry production, milk processing, and poultry and beef slaughter industries. And so far, we've had 189 requests for PPE, and 69% of those requests have come from the dairy industry. So moving to the national picture on the monitoring efforts that have happened in public health since February of 2022, there have been over 14,200 people that have been monitored. Over 520 of them have been tested for influenza A. And then since March of 2024, there have been over 4,800 people that have been monitored. 2,260 of them had dairy cattle exposure, over 2,600 had poultry exposure, over 240 people have been tested for influenza A, including 73 dairy exposures and 170 poultry exposures. And so moving into the human cases, and updating my slides, the last time we met, there was 1 case that had been reported in Colorado in 2022, and 1 case that had been reported in Texas in 2024. We're currently up to 15 human cases in the United States associated with this H5N1 virus. 10 of them are associated with poultry exposures, including the one Colorado case from April 2022, and then 9 poultry workers in July of 2024 that were part of a depopulation effort in Colorado. There have been 4 cases that are associated with dairy cattle exposure in Texas, Michigan, and Colorado. So 2 cases in Michigan, 1 case in Texas, and 1 in Colorado reported April through July of 2024. And then just last week, or the previous week, there was 1 case that was detected in Missouri. And this was, unlike the rest of the previous human cases that were associated with animal outbreaks and response efforts, this case was a hospitalized case that was picked up through routine influenza surveillance. So just to give you a background, in the United States, all hospitalized cases of influenza that test positive in a clinical hospital lab, those isolates are sent to the state health department where they're then further evaluated and sequenced and uploaded into the national surveillance. So it's just one way that public health monitors the influenza viruses that are circulating in people. And so that's where this one was picked up. This person had multiple underlying conditions, and it's not clear if they were actually hospitalized for respiratory disease. The investigation in Missouri is still ongoing, but there's so far been no known animal exposures that have been reported, no raw milk consumption. And so the actual where this person picked up this virus is still unclear. Apparently, there's 1 household contact that was also sick at the same time, but was not tested. And as at the last report that I saw on Friday, CDC is still working to fully sequence. They have been able to confirm that this is an H5 and that it's an N1, but the full sequencing hasn't been able to be done so far. They're still working on it. And so that investigation is still pending, so there'll be more information to come out at this point. And so it's looking at these human cases as a whole. There have been, I believe it's 8 cases that have been fully genotyped and sequenced, and all of them since March of 2024 have been the H5N1 E313 genotype. In these investigations, there's been no evidence of person-to-person transmission. There are currently serologic surveys that are ongoing in Michigan, Colorado, and Ohio at the American Association of Bovine Practitioners, the meeting. There's been preliminary information released from Michigan where 0 out of 35 asymptomatic dairy workers were found to not have any evidence of antibodies to this virus. So the CDC is routinely running their risk assessments for this virus and its risk to the general public. And so at this point in time, the risk to the general public remains low, and it remains an occupational risk to those people who have direct exposure to animals that are infected with the virus. And so there's been some interesting notes to the field and summary investigations that have been published in the morbidity and mortality report that summarize the investigations going on both in Michigan and Colorado. I also wanted to let you know about the wastewater monitoring that is also happening as well. And so wastewater monitoring essentially consists of testing wastewater effluent that's coming into wastewater treatment plants for influenza A H5N1. And so wastewater monitoring came into use or being during the COVID pandemic. And it was found to be a good early predictor of increasing rates in the community. And it's also been used to detect mpox infections in communities as well. And so it's really a new surveillance that public health is using. There's many different viruses and bacteria that our public health laboratories are using to see if it can be a good community predictor of what's going on. And so H5N1 or H5 is one of those viruses that CDC is exploring to see if wastewater testing can be helpful. The most important thing to know is that with these detections and testing is that you cannot determine the source of H5 in these wastewater detections. There's possibility, we know that milk processing will utilize sewer, and so that can be found in the wastewater effluent. There can be runoff from wild birds, so multiple different environmental inputs into the wastewater. And currently, there are 4 Minnesota sites that are included in national surveillance. They're the St. Cloud, Red Wing, Mankato, and Rochester sewer systems. And so those are being reported weekly on CDC's website. We have had 7 H5 detections in Minnesota, but again, we can't determine where those sources are. So it's just one way of noting that there's H5 in the area, and where that actual source is coming from is not able to be determined. We've also updated our human health messages and based on our interactions with folks we've been monitoring and the need to simplify our messages and educate essentially an entire workforce. And so we have an entire page on our website now that has new updated health sheets, simplified health sheets that try to explain what the PPE is, what symptoms that we're concerned about. We've also created companion animal guidance for mixed animal veterinary clinics, small animal clinics that may have exposure to animals such as cats that may present to their clinics. So we've worked with our Board of Animal Health colleagues to put those together and distribute as well. We have a 1-page infographic to simplify our messages. We also created a Spanish worker interview that discusses in Spanish what our monitoring is and what PPE recommendations are in a very basic hot and on and off PPE. And so all of those are available for distribution and on our website, and we have a QR code as well for our videos. And our current efforts now, CDC provided $5 million for influenza vaccination distribution, targeting people that work in animal agriculture. And so we're working on outreach and promotion for seasonal flu vaccination among farm workers working with livestock. And so we've reached out and had conversations with some of our poultry partners, and we'll be reaching out more to other livestock industries because we know that there are multiple concerns with vaccination hesitancy, and so we really want to try to address those when we think about our outreach efforts. So if anyone has any suggestions, completely open. But our goal is to provide some outreach and promotion packets to people to be able to use, and then also utilize our communications efforts as well. And so our biggest issue with seasonal influenza vaccine is that it doesn't actually protect you against H5N1. Our biggest concern from the public health standpoint is that reassortment. So you have someone who is infected with a seasonal influenza and then happens to be co-infected with an H5N1. Using influenza's Lego ability, they're swapping genes, and it's really something that's even more concerning. So it's a hard message to get across to the general public, but we will try. So that's H5N1. And then I'll just quickly go. We've been busy with a lot of things over the summer, but wanted to concentrate a bit on tuberemia because that's been another high volume efforts this year. So just a reminder about tularemia. Tularemia is the disease caused by Francisella tularensis, and it causes rabbit fever. It's a bacteria that can be carried by over 200 species, but rabbits and rodents are the primary reservoirs, and that's where people are most likely exposed. So we see infections in both animals and people, and we work with the Board of Animal Health to do follow-up on any animal cases that are reported here in Minnesota. And so the clinical signs are similar. Fever with non-specific signs. There's different clinical forms depending on the route of exposure, but we're most concerned about pulmonary TB. The pets are exposed by hunting animals, usually rabbits. So cats are the most likely pet that we'll see reported in Minnesota, or tick or fly bites. And then people are usually exposed to their sick pets or also getting tick or fly bites. And so this year, we are on track to set a record of the number of animal and human tularemia cases. All of the cases that have been reported are actually in the Twin Cities metro. We have several hot spots where we think we have some rabbit and zoonotic infections happening. But we've actually had 5 human cases this year, which is a record for us, including 4 pneumonic cases, which is also a record. And it's a fascinating exposure in that we've had at least 2 occupational exposures of people who work for Parks and Recs departments where they've mowed over a dead rabbit, which essentially then aerosolizes the bacteria and they inhale it, and then they end up in the ICU. So it's a nasty little bug. But we've also had 14 animal cases reported, including 4 canines. So we usually don't see dog cases, but we actually had 1 dog death this time. But so we've worked with the Board of Animal Health to do some outreach in June, letting kids know that we're seeing this. And we are so excited that the Veterinary Diagnostic Lab now has a PCR test. So that will likely increase our numbers due to increased testing, but it's a much easier test for our veterinarians to be able to diagnose it in animals. Rather than having to submit an animal for necropsy and culture. And that's usually where we get most of our cases reported here in Minnesota. And then I just wanted to end with this week is Fungal Disease Awareness Week. And so one of my colleagues, Dr. Maria Ireland, is actually presenting 3 of our blastomycosis outbreaks that have affected both animals and people on a national webinar on the 19th. And so these are available for CE. And there is also a fungal diseases and One Health webinar that is on the 17th. That is a presentation with ABMA and CDC talking about all of the animal fungal diseases that we're concerned about. And so with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
2 questions. Sure. Do you have a blastomycosis distribution map for the state of Minnesota?
We do. I don't have it in my slides, but it's actually on our website. So if you want to, oh, sorry. Yes, sorry. But the question was whether we had a blastomycosis distribution map. And we do. We have one that shows the residence of both animals and people, but then what's even more fascinating is their actual most likely exposure, because we see most of our blastomycosis cases in animals and people in the Twin Cities metro. But when you look at their exposure, they're actually usually exposed in the northeast and eastern part of Minnesota. Sure.
My second question is about tularemia. So for civilian, if they find a rabbit behaving strangely in their yard, are there steps that they can take to help with tularemia surveillance or not?
So the question was with tularemia, if someone from the general public sees a rabbit acting strangely, is there anything that they can do to help with surveillance? If they are willing to incur the cost, they can deliver the animal to the veterinary diagnostic lab for testing. We do, when we find either people or animals that are positive, we do a site investigation where we attempt to collect ticks and flies from that area. Then if we can find any rabbit carcasses, we don't unfortunately have the ability to do trapping, but we will attempt to do some environmental assessments as well.
Any other questions?
Thanks so much.
There's a question in the chat.
Go ahead.
I think it's.
Okay, the question is from Dr. Schlist on the HPAI response in poultry. Some of us are hearing that people working on depopulation and disposal will be required to do change 3 times a day while working on a positive farm. Is that true? Dr. Schlist, I haven't heard that, but I will ask. I am not aware of any changes to the recommendations requiring changes. There is the basic recommendations for N95 that, recommend changing them if they become dirty or wet. But I haven't seen any new guidance coming across the desk. But please let me know if you're hearing where you're hearing differently. I can track that down. Okay, thanks. I'll reach out to my colleagues in Colorado and see if I can find out any more information.
All right. So we are ending right at lunchtime, but I actually want to take a couple minutes to know Lucas. If I remember correctly, this farm specifically worked with a consultant that the USDA provided to create a farm biosecurity plan. So I just want to, if you could take a couple minutes to maybe talk about that experience. And then your farm is so unique in that you have the general knowledge here. And so maybe just touch on how that plan has helped you with having the public here.
Yeah, thank you. So first, if you don't know, plug for Department of Ag Board of Animal Health providing a biosecurity planner. David Wyman is his name. He's available, he's ready. So if you're like, that farm needs a biosecurity plan, he's ready to come out and do it. The best part of the biosecurity plan was that my wife did it because I was busy that day. But she's probably, I'll be honest, she's probably in the best position to do it because of her background with food safety. And so I'll tell you, the average farmer maybe doesn't think of, we have SOPs on the farm, standard operating procedures on the farm. We have protocols on the farm, but she is a literally like national leader and speaker for HACCP. And for those of you who know that acronym, which I'm guessing is most of the room, but just critical control points and things of stoppages, and was able to honestly share whether we had or didn't have things. So they sat at that table right there. I think it took about 3 hours, or no, I think it took about 2 hours, which we know David, so there's probably lots of joking and laughing in between. But it took about 2 hours from beginning to end, and he came back a week later with a really nice plan. By chance, by luck, and maybe by accidental design, our farm is set up well, especially for H5N1 cattle. Our milking herd is completely consolidated together, and we have a public viewing area with a big window where you can walk right up to it and see cows getting milked now, which wouldn't have been the case 12 months ago. We added robots last August. And so what we had then and what we have now, you can see all parts of our farm, and we can still keep the biosecurity plan turned on. Trying to remember all your questions, Erica, so tell me if I'm forgetting something or getting off course. But basically, we have a sidewalk that kind of stops you from going to the lactating cattle. And so you can go in what was our old parlor and holding pen and see through two large windows just like these, cows getting milked in robots. I guess it helped us think about things we would change if we were diagnosed with H5N1 or some future disease. We've always thought about, for 10, 15 years, the worst case scenario about a true foreign animal disease that affects dairy, what we would do differently on the driveways and that sort of thing. But, one of our benefits here, I think, in addition to luck or purposeful design, we didn't really think about it at the time, but maybe naturally we did, was having a driveway a little farther from the road gives you a lot of chance to stop and deviate. And having two driveways coming to the farm would have a lot of opportunity to direct traffic. So those are the things, if we wanted to go, so we're kind of always at the same biosecurity level. Oh, you asked about tours. We're always kind of at the same biosecurity level. I'll talk about that in a moment. But if we need to go next level, I think we now do the biosecurity plan. We thought about, this is how we would implement that I won't mention any names of diseases, but worst case scenario. So normal day-to-day biosecurity, we do welcome people here from all over the world as ruminants. Obviously, our feed is coming from fields that are not protected, and there are certainly birds and wildlife going through. We did two things. One, if you are on one of our farm tours, it's not your normal, here's the calves, here's the heifers, here's the cows. We're telling the story of the land, the story of our farm evolving, and the story of how your food is made. So it's a very different tour, I think, than when I've jumped on a bus and toured dairy farms, which is no offense to them, it's just not a farm-focused tour, it's a consumer-focused tour. And as that, we kind of have a trail, and for the first 6 months or so, we had booties. And we thought those were a disaster. It scared cattle. I'm sure they would eventually be used to them. But on rainy, wet days, they're just a disaster. And so we decided to go without booties. And we're more thinking about human health, wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands. Department of Health staff have come out a couple of times and kind of, they also have free consultation. I think that's fair to say, or maybe Stacy just likes me. But no, I think they've come out once because a school tour, someone got sick, we think not affiliated with this farm, and another time just kind of on a general consult and have thought about where to put washing stations and those sorts of things. So we're more focused on the human health side of things and say, if you're from a farm that would be infected, wash your shoes or do whatever you need to do to stay biosecure, because we just don't believe that we have the kind of protection right now to provide to other animals that might leave the site. And I thought of one other thing. Any questions so far? But then we do stress biosecurity throughout the whole thing, and I think that's kind of fun and something that's not fun with H5N1. But a lot of our talks on the cattle-focused calls have been talking about biosecurity that dairy farmers already do due to our natural processes. We're not even thinking about biosecurity. In the parlor is pretty natural, but the way we separate animals on a dairy farm, you've got some kind of natural biosecurity steps built in that our maybe hog and poultry friends do barn by barn. We just do it where you can see all the animals at once, but they're spread out from pen to pen and that sort of thing. So we're able to talk about that through the tour. So there's one other thing that I forgot, but any other questions, or did I answer all of your questions, Madam Chair? Thank you very much. But yeah, you're free to walk in to the front door of that black door, and you can walk all the way back and see the robots, see the bulk tank. But our tours kind of encompass the whole farm, minus the lactating barn. Do you have a question? Or yeah.
So our unit at the health department, we do enteric investigations as well that are associated with animal contact, and we're trying very hard to be as proactive as possible. And so we have an online training program called Safer Faces that walks essentially people that have petting zoos or apple orchards and those types of things, or people who are utilizing agritourism to bring people to their farms and potentially encourage animal contact. And we try to walk people through, issues that have arisen in other investigations. And so just to get people to think about, if you're going to feed people, feed them first, then go see the animals, rather than the other way around. And we're putting in washing stations and stuff like that. So that, as Lucas said, we're happy to to provide any types of walkthroughs and site visits to hopefully, so you don't have to talk to us.
My last plug, Curd Fest is Father's Day Saturday every year. We have about 1,500 people out here. The dry cows really enjoy the concert and bands out front. So you're welcome to come back any Friday and Saturday when we're open. Thursdays during the summer. Curd Fest is kind of our big party. So thank you.
Right, so we are going to break for lunch. Any special instructions for lunch?
Yeah, box lunches and we'll bring them out.
Okay. So let's reconvene at 12:05. Thank you. Hey, Laura, do you have a presentation that we can get on the screen for you? Okay.
Yeah, I will go ahead and share that.
Perfect.
Is that working for you?
We see it.
Okay, great. Thanks.
I think that you can go ahead and get started. We are ready for you.
Great. All right. Well, thanks. And I'm so sorry I couldn't be there today. I really wanted to visit Redhead Creamery. I'm really always thrilled to follow the progress of the work that Elise and Lucas and their families are accomplishing there. So sorry I couldn't be there. It's a pretty crazy time of work here. Time at work here with the beginning of the fall semester. And we have some excitement tomorrow with the inauguration of President Cunningham. I just wanted to mention that she's already been to our college twice and to the Miracle of Birth, where people, students and faculty from our college, of course, are spending some time with our partners at MVMA and others. So she's very engaged and interested in the work of the college and in the St. Paul campus, which is fantastic. Speaking of Miracle of Birth, we had a number of faculty and staff who spent time at the fair in various areas. We were always thrilled to see so much representation there. We had folks from the Minnesota Center for Prion Research and Outreach, is what you can see in the upper left-hand corner. And then our Clinical Investigation Center, our Raptor Center, I've already mentioned the Miracle of Birth, Animal Cancer Center, and also at the Pet Surgery Center as usual. I want to draw your attention to some rankings where you can see that we continue to climb in the QS top universities rankings. This is specific to employability of our graduates, which is great. And you can see that we're doing really well. We're doing even better in some of our other, our rankings are even stronger, by the way, in things like citations per researcher, but I shared this because I thought it might be more interesting to you. And I will just make a quick note that the deans of the AAVMC colleges of veterinary medicine decided to no longer follow the US News and World Report. So that's why we're using QS, because we don't use US anymore. That's just because the US News and World Report methodology is so weak that the deans were concerned that it was meaningless. I want to draw your attention to a new research effort that is focused on rural veterinary practitioners. So some of you might be rural veterinary practitioners, but for people who are not, whether they are in the profession or outside the profession, people have some pretty firm ideas, but we want to better understand the work of what rural veterinarians do. So for example, one of the misconceptions that I often hear is that rural veterinarians only do food animal work. And of course, they need to treat any species that are in those rural areas, while some may only do food animal, some may only do small animal in rural areas, and many do mixed. So Sarah Davis, you can see her email, excuse me there, would love an email from you if you are interested in participating in her survey on the knowledge, skills, and level of autonomy that we expect of new graduates. And then there will be focus groups for more depth behind that survey data. Our class of 2028 arrived here in St. Paul and in Brookings for our 2+2 program, and they're both off to a great start. This year's Minnesota class at 125 students, or the combined class is 125 with 105 here and 20 in Brookings. And we continue to emphasize all sorts of diversity, including gender and community of origin. So for example, I think I shared with you last time that we've been really successful in recruiting and attracting rural students. So I just got the news today, and our number of applicants is up another 1,000, or about 10% from last year. So we will have a lot of applicants to select from for the next year's class too. And partly because of this competitive, increasingly competitive process of getting into veterinary school with supply and demand, the overall quality, and I hesitate to use that term, but the metrics, whether it be academic preparation, previous experience with animals, et cetera, is increasing because we can be and need to be more selective in order to select those students out of that giant pool of applicants. In the SDSU partnership category, I have updates that I typically give you, the 2+2. Again, the students are here and they're doing great, but we've got some bumps in the road. Reciprocity was ended by the state of South Dakota. And so we no longer have reciprocity, but we were able to grandfather in the class that is entering this fall, so they wouldn't have any, really unpleasant surprises. We couldn't extend that beyond this fall. The reason we were able to do it for this fall is that that's what those applicants had been expecting. But we are having to be clear with next year's applicants that that's no longer the case. Now, with the shortage of academic veterinarians that I've mentioned in the past, there's a shortage of veterinarians, and there's also a shortage of specific categories of veterinarians, including specialists in academia, which has doubled over the last 10 years. And that makes it harder for any of us to recruit and retain faculty, and it's been especially challenging in Brookings. And so we've recently had to say goodbye to Dr. Jesse Juarez, who was the director of that program and did a lot of teaching. And I'm staying in frequent communication with their dean about their search processes, et cetera. This is maybe more detailed than you would be interested in, but I just put the slide up to share with you that as far as preparation of these students when they come to us, they're doing as well or maybe slightly better than the students on this one basic science standardized test, which is only one measure, but it is an objective measure because it is an externally administered exam that we contract with the same organization that administers the North American Veterinary Licensing Exam. And so you can see their students are very well prepared in this measure of kind of baseline knowledge. And we tell the students from both places not to study for this. We don't want to know how well they could do. We want to know how well they do without any additional studying. What is the baseline level of knowledge that they have at this point of the program, which is a little more than, no, it's about halfway through the program because the third year has 3 semesters. It's about halfway through the program when we administer this test. So I'm going to transition here to the Health Sciences Strategic Plan. You may have received an email from Erin Kreider that I sent to her, continuing to solicit input from the board and other interested parties on the Health Sciences Strategic Plan, because veterinary medicine is one of the 6 colleges within health sciences at the University of Minnesota, and we've been working on a combined strategic plan. We presented this to the Board of Regents just last Thursday. We presented previous drafts, but we presented what we hope to be the near final draft. It has changed quite a bit. It will continue to change a little bit, I'm sure. So again, it's not too late to give input. So I've just outlined the 4 objectives: expanding access to rural health workforce and shortages statewide, And you can see here that we are proposing that we would increase our class size by an additional 20 students. So that they chose to communicate it as 200 over 10 years, but that's 20 students a year. And that's if we receive the funding that is being requested to support the health sciences strategic plan. I should have mentioned, just by way of background, that this whole strategic planning effort came out of the governor's task force on academic health. So this was something that we'd been requested to do out of the governor's task force, was come up with this strategic plan. So with that investment, we could expand the workforce. Without that investment, it will certainly be more challenging. Again, this is a health sciences wide strategic plan. It includes medicine, dentistry, public health, nursing, pharmacy, and vet med. And you can see that we are also aiming to reduce health inequities. We've got situations where there's maldistribution of healthcare professionals, healthcare deserts, not just in rural areas. We also have other challenges to health equity and outcomes that are different in different populations. And then improved quality of healthcare close to home. This includes mobile and telehealth, which may or may not be relevant to veterinary medicine. And well, we do have mobile health clinics, certainly, but telehealth is a different animal in veterinary medicine. So that key action may be less relevant to veterinary medicine, more relevant to human medicine, but it does include piloting a One Health clinic. And if you haven't heard about this kind of concept, it's unique, but it's when students from different healthcare professions come together to provide healthcare for animals in their community, animals and their community. So we might have a dog owner who is talking to a pharmacy student about medication management, and the dog might be receiving wellness care from a veterinary student. And we have grant funding to pilot that. So that one can move forward even without the legislative investment. And then the fourth is to transform health outcomes through innovation, prevention, treatment, and care models. This is really the research objective. And again, it's interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, comparative medicine research. So I know that's a lot, but I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Are there any questions? Dr. Molgaard, this is Dr. Fox.
Hi.
Are there any other successful 2+2 programs that do not have reciprocity?
Boy, that is such a good question, Dr. Fox. I don't think I know that answer. 2+2 programs are challenging in all. I've never talked to a dean of a 2+2 program that didn't express that it is a challenging situation for both the kind of satellite location and for the mothership. So they are not easy, but 2+2 programs without reciprocity. I will make that note, and I will have to get back to you with an answer. It is challenging. I'm sorry. I'll just say one more thing that I know Dean Cassidy is planning on fundraising to try to make up that difference, but that's also a heavy lift to fundraise the difference for scholarships. So yeah, sorry, go ahead, please.
Okay, and I was just wondering if there were any efforts by folks that are involved in the program on both sides, to maybe make an exception for that program. And then the final question would just be, like, how often are these kind of things addressed? Like, just because I don't know, and maybe you don't know the answer either, but all I can see is this students and programs that are in rural communities suffering. So I would say, like, where I'm located, our local university, which I know is not UofM related, but just kind of curious of how, how this all works, because we have a lot of South Dakota students and a lot of Minnesota rural students go to SDS, right? So just wondering how those discussions happen or helping.
The reciprocity discussions, How do those
Yeah.
happen? It's a question. Yeah. Sometimes they happen at the legislative level. Sometimes they happen, or sometimes they maybe begin at a university or system level. But they are very complicated because, as you said, you know, you've got, at least within the state of Minnesota, you've got the Minnesota State system, you've got the University of Minnesota system. And so if there are potential implications for the whole system if there were to be a change. And how often are they revisited? This one came out of the blue. This one was a big surprise to everyone, I think, at both institutions. And so I suppose they could happen without any real warning, which is what happened here with this one. I think your other question was, is there any way that we could, for just this program, this 2+2 partnership, could we maintain reciprocity? We did look into that, and the answer was no, we could not. So we were able to grandfather in the enrolled students, both those who are already enrolled at Brookings in year 2 and the new students coming in year 1. And even that was a very heavy lift to accomplish that. So I think the answer, for at least for the current era, is that there isn't an option to have individual program reciprocity because it went away at a state level.
Or this is Erica, a quick question that maybe isn't as easy to answer, but if there's an increase in applicants and I think there's such a demand for veterinarians, is there ever an opportunity to increase your class size?
Yes, that is why. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Erica. That is absolutely what we want to do. And that's why we were put that into the health sciences strategic plan, that in addition to the other health professionals that they are hoping to increase, that we be included in that. But we would need funding to do that because it requires quite a, there's the challenge of the extra capacity needed for faculty and staff potentially. There's the challenge with supplies and equipment. There's the challenge with even facilities and needing to renovate some facilities. So there's some one-time costs, and then there's some ongoing costs. And so we've included a cursory analysis of that. I mean, this was a very rapid process, but a cursory analysis of that in this budget request that is a part of the university's request to the legislature. So we aren't going alone on it. It's part of a package. But thanks for asking that. That's been the challenge or frustration for years, is we've got the applicant pool, but we just haven't had the capacity to accept more.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? All right, I don't see any. Thanks for your time.
Oh, thanks so much. I'm sorry again that I was unable to join and that I'm kind of double and triple booked here today.
That's all right.
Bye-bye.
Like we have Shauna next. And I didn't update the data on PowerPoint.
Can I minimize this?
Yeah, and then I'm sorry, I'm trying to shoot that.
So I'm going to dive in a little deeper on a couple of the diseases that we've already talked about, avian Medina virus and H5N1 in poultry. Okay. Push that and then just leave things. Oh, it was that it's just not. Can I get my flashback? I don't think this is great. That's not turning my company around. Okay, sorry. Yes, absolutely. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that was a great day on Tuesday. Okay. There we go. Okay, talk about pneumovirus first. You've already mentioned, I've heard from a couple people already that it's here. I think at the last board meeting that I presented, that was in February, and I had mentioned that we knew that it was potentially coming. We had had detections on the East Coast. And so this is just kind of a reminder of what it is. Pneumovirus is a virus. It's highly infectious respiratory disease that also causes some reproductive disorders in egg-laying birds. And so it's sometimes known as turkey rhinotracheitis or swollen head syndrome in broilers. And it has been known to infect pheasants, ducks, and guinea fowl as well. I haven't actually experienced that in Minnesota yet. But something to keep in mind when we look at all of these cases is that the pneumovirus has a pretty significant immunosuppressive properties to it. And so when they get infected, it's not always the pneumovirus that's causing the problem, as all the other things and the comorbidities that come along with that cause the issues. So what the clinical picture looks like, and this is what we're seeing in Minnesota as well. Turkey breeders have had a really significant impact by this, and that they have a huge egg production drop. And so for a bird that's supposed to be producing eggs to then be sent to the hatchery, some of these flocks have been seeing up to like an 80 to 90% drop in egg production, which has really significant impacts, and it's caused kind of a national or nationwide shortage of poults. Actually, that's all of our companies have gone through this. That can last anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks, and it does come back sometimes not to the full potential that they originally could be. As far as commercial meat type birds, we've been seeing some really significant and high mortality rates with these. And again, it's probably not the pneumovirus itself that's causing all of the mortalities, but some of the other infections, depending on where they're at with their production and their life cycle. And so we've had some flocks that have had close to 100% mortality, which makes it really challenging. We've also got influenza that are out there on the landscape. So we've had some of these flocks that I've tested 2-3 times thinking it's got to be HPAI, right, with the amount of dead birds that they're reporting, and it's not, it's just a virus. So that's been really hard, and it's pretty hit or miss. And some commercial turkey flocks seem to recover just fine, and some have had these really significant mortalities. Broiler breeders see something similar, but it's much less significant. So their egg production drops from those breeder birds are reporting anywhere from 5 to 10%, maybe up to 5%. So it's something that they can kind of, it's a little bump in the road, but they can recover from that. And then from what I'm hearing in egg layer chickens, it's probably underdiagnosed because people don't notice that it's even there. And so I've talked to a couple veterinarians who have table egg layers, and they said, all my flocks are serologic positive, but I didn't even know that it went through. So we first had our first detection in Minnesota in the middle of April. And when it hit, we were tracking all of our cases, and when we were reporting them into our database and pulling on a map that looks something like this and sending it out to our growers so that they kind of understood and knew where the virus was, where it was circulating, so that they could kind of prepare themselves. What I wasn't prepared for was how fast it went through the country or the countryside. So, within weeks, it was everywhere in Minnesota. We predominantly had metapneumovirus type A in Minnesota, but we did have some farms that had the type B, and we actually had some farms that had both, infections. So from the time that we had our first detection in April to the end of June, when I stopped keeping track of these at our premises level, in a flock level, we had 288 positive rounds, and that's just on PCR alone, 37 counties. This is some interesting data that came out of a research project that the Minnesota Turkey Growers Association did in collaboration with Dr. Jill Zawatzke. And so they worked with our laboratory to do some pre-market pneumovirus serology testing. And so all the turkey flocks in Minnesota send blood samples to the lab to test for both pathogenic avian influenza as part of the aMPV program. So they took that blood that was already there and did pneumovirus serology testing with their goal of thinking, well, maybe it's an early detection system within Minnesota. We'd be able to pick up some cases before, we even realized that it's here. Well, everybody knew that it's here by the time we were starting to find it, but it's kind of an interesting graph. This one is just kind of by date, and so blue is negative results. And you can see, when we had our first PCR detection and then just, weeks before everything started turning positive. And so here in April, we had, 100% basically serologic negative, and by June, everything was serologic positive. So again, this blew through the state within months, and everything added is kind of shocking how fast. And the biosecurity measures just didn't seem to even put it down in the spread of this. Since July 1st, so that was a really difficult thing to try to keep on top of, was tracking all of those different cases. And so because it is reportable in the state, we are continuing to track it, but we're doing it at the session level. So, one flock that's maybe tested every couple of weeks to see what's happening with the viral load. We're going to detect that multiple times. We're not going to break it out by premises. But even throughout the summer, we continued to see positive cases. So we've had 57 PCR positive sessions through July and August. And we continue to see those serologic positives. We seem to be having an uptick in cases within the last probably a handful of weeks. And I think that's maybe twofold. There might be some seasonality to it. We might also have native birds on the ground, right? Those original birds that we had in the spring that now processed or marketed, and now we've got new birds. So we'll kind of see. We've been doing a lot of foreign animal disease investigations as a result of this. So, I still get reports, probably a couple every week, saying my mortality is high. I need to test for influenza, and so we do. When that's negative, we test for pneumovirus, and that's positive. So, just kind of to show you that, we're not this alone. These are maps that Dr. Stephen Clark has been putting together. He's kind of running a self-led pneumovirus working group. And that started probably at the end of last year, and he continues to have that. So that group meets every couple of weeks, but he's putting these maps together to kind of show you how that's spread across the country. So this is the historical when we've had pneumovirus, and Brian mentioned it was type C in the past. These are the states that had that type C. So I'm just going to flip through these pretty quickly, but January is when we had our first detections on the East Coast, and that was type B pneumovirus. And then I actually think it was the day of our board meeting, we were starting to hear rumors of a type A out in California. And so that's showing up on this map. February, March, April, May, June, July, and August. So everybody's got it, everybody's dealing with this. It's still pretty dramatic to see how quickly once it hits the area, how fast it goes. What are we doing as far as the states? It is reportable in the state, but it is not necessarily actionable. So we don't take the same sort of regulatory action that we do for high-path avian influenza. So there's no indemnity programs, there's no compensation available for producers. We don't establish control zones or anything like that. It's kind of help to support our industry as best as we can, but ultimately it's the producers that kind of take the brunt of those losses when the farms are affected by this. So there's the potential for some trade impacts, although no countries have typically said, we won't take any poultry from the United States. So we do have pneumovirus, but if a particular company or farm wanted to ship to some other country, that particular farm, if we were affected, could have some impact. So overall, the trade has not been a big concern for us. So then the next question is, what are we going to do about this? Can't we get a vaccine, right? I get that question almost every day. How do we get this vaccine? And so the Center for Veterinary Biologics is now accepting some applications to, and as you've already mentioned, but to bring in potentially imported products from other countries, because Europe routinely vaccinates for pneumovirus. And then also potential applications to develop like an experimental autogenous vaccine. So taking a strain of the virus that's been isolated, you know, at the local outbreak level and developing a vaccine for that. So what we currently have available right now, the only thing that's available is killed vaccine. So they're not allowing any sort of modified live vaccine, and the industry is concerned that that's not going to be enough. So the killed viruses tend to be less effective at providing a lasting immunity. But we've got two companies right now that we have made some requests in Minnesota. HIPRA USA is actually a Spanish-based European company that has a vaccine, a killed vaccine for type B. There's some cross reactivity between the A's and the B's. So have primarily A and C vaccinated against B, we should get a response. This vaccine does require an injection of each bird. So it's not going to be practical at like a commercial farm level where you have to handle each bird and give them an injection. But it might be something that's really valuable for birds in production that are producing eggs. So trying to make sure that we don't have that egg production drop. There has been a request to bring this vaccine in. There's been a little bit of some hiccups in actually getting that vaccine in Minnesota. I approved a request maybe a month ago, and from what I understand, they still haven't received the product yet. The other company is Cambridge Technologies, and somehow they were working with Merck to develop this experimental autogenous vaccine. And so this is a virus that they were able to obtain, not from Minnesota, but from another company within the United States. So it's a U.S. origin field strain. And it's the same thing. They're making an injectable killed vaccine. And I've had a request from a couple of different companies to get this product in. So I'm hoping that that will be able to get into these growers' hands a little bit more quickly. There's a requirement that I put on all the approvals that say, I guess it's on the previous slide, but you know, a vaccinated bird is not allowed to actually be shipped to a state unaffected by pneumovirus. Looking at those maps, there's not very many states that aren't impacted right now, and I don't actually know how that's being tracked because, you know, that map that I have is the industry map, and I don't think USDA is tracking that. So I don't think that's going to be a significant drawback, but it is something that we're required to add to these requests. Okay, so then switching over to the other bad disease in poultry, just give an overview about what HPAI is doing in our birds. So this was already mentioned by a couple of people. You know, this is an ongoing event. So it started back in the spring of 2022. We've had 172 confirmed cases in 47 counties, and it's resulted in 8.4 million birds depopulated just in Minnesota. I threw this slide in here as kind of what last fall looked like as a reminder, because it was kind of a tough fall for us with the migration. We had 39 confirmed cases. You can see that breakdown. There's some mostly commercial turkey birds and turkey breeders. We did have one table egg layer and some backyard premises. That outbreak kind of continued into 2024. We had a handful of 3 backyard cases, probably an ongoing continuation of that fall because we didn't have a winter last year, but there was less snow, it was still warm. And so we had 3 non-commercial poultry flocks identified kind of early in the year. And then April hit, and we've had, you can see a total of 18 commercial poultry premises since April. And the outbreak this spring carried into the summer, which is something that we hadn't not seen before. Normally our cases are tied to our spring and fall migration period, and by the time we hit Memorial Day, we're, you know, wiping our brows and saying we got through it. And that wasn't the case this year. So we had a lot of detections in June, and even into the beginning of July. And I think the reason for that is the fact that the same virus or similar virus has been circulating in the dairy cattle. And so of the 18 commercial premises that we have, all but 1 were typed and sequenced to be that genotype B313, which is the dairy strain. So we had 1 case, and I want to say it was probably late April, early May, that was determined to be a wild bird origin, and the rest of these have likely come from dairy. So looking ahead as far as, what's this fall gonna bring? I don't know. We always worry going into a fall migration. But we don't know how much virus is still circulating in dairy cattle, and potential dairy waste that might, still be a risk of the poultry farmers. And so when I talk to growers, I just get a kind of a sense of anxiety, not really understanding where all the virus is coming from. They know how to protect against some wild bird, mitigation measures and what to watch for and when to watch, but with it being in other species now, it's just made things a little bit more challenging. I did ask USDA last week, like when is it done, right? Like when do you officially kind of close things out and Minnesota is considered free? And to get that kind of final closed out status in Minnesota, all remaining poultry premises and non-poultry premises have to have their quarantines lifted and their fallow period. So we did have one backyard flock in July that is undergoing a 120 day fallow period. And so if we can get and stay free of any other detections by mid-November, we might be able to get that free status. One other thing that I just want to mention that's kind of on the horizon and coming forward is USDA put forward a H5N1 but in interim rule that specifically relates to biosecurity and biosecurity auditing. Back in 2022, at kind of the start of our outbreak, they were requiring that anybody who wanted to place birds into a buffer zone. So if you have an infected farm, they draw control zones around it. So there's a 3-kilometer infected zone and then a 10-kilometer buffer zone. So if you want to place birds within that buffer zone, you needed to have an on-site biosecurity audit conducted to make sure that the biosecurity practices were, good enough in order to help prevent outbreaks. So we were conducting it via Microsoft Teams, and we'd have somebody on the ground with a camera while we're trying to take a look at things. Having that audit then makes you eligible for indemnity if you do end up working with influenza. People who are in that infected zone, doesn't matter even if you get an audit, you're not eligible for indemnity if you decide to place birds in the county. So that requirement now is going into this interim rule, and it's being put forward. And the other addition to that is that they're going to be requiring the infected farm before they restock with birds to also have an on-site biosecurity audit conducted. And as long as the state is still kind of considered an outbreak, that audit would need to be conducted every 6 months. So that's an extra, burden for the producers. It's an extra burden for the states and the response team to have to do that. So I don't know where this is at fully. I think it was submitted to the OMB, and it's expected to probably be in effect probably in 2025. So that's what I have. Is there any questions?
For the USDA rule that went back in 2025, I assume you at some point read all the proposed language. Do you know if a third-party audit could be allowed?
I haven't actually seen the rule. I don't know if anybody has seen the rule. I don't really answer that. I feel like it's been asked, but I don't know. I know they have said, if the states don't have the capacity to do this, then it would then fall to USDA. But I'm already looking to find a way of trying to get out of this, just because it's an extra thing we have to do. We have an auditor to be able to conduct those, but if we have to be repeating these audits every 6 months, that's a lot more extra work. It's just, we just need more bodies to do that.
And that audit. Any of the audits, especially the infected farm that would have to be re-audited every 6 months. Is that like Microsoft Teams, or is it in person time?
I think the first one for sure has to be in person before you're involved with place birds. I don't know about the follow-ups that they'll allow virtual audit to happen. I want to say yes. But I don't know.
But can you track that the one that's there? So
yeah, I think it's done in Worthington.
Any questions? Thank you. All right. So, Dr. Katie Cornille, Senior Veterinarian here at the board. In the spring, I was talking about this mystery cattle syndrome at our last board meeting, and now, you know, a lot has happened since then, so we're gonna get an update on that. So I'll just kind of go over the background, the situation, talk about where we are nationally and at the state, and talk about what we've been doing in our Minnesota response. So as we remember, which seems like a distant memory at this point, you know, in early March, there was that syndrome reported in Texas and the Southwest of, you know, sudden drops in milk production that, you know, had everyone on edge. And then now at this point, we can definitively say that, you know, it is due to the H5N1 virus, and which was, you know, confirmed March 25, and subsequently, as we heard from the Department of Health, there were early developments in human cases, mostly occupational. And then since April 24th and still in effect is the USDA order that requires testing for interstate movement and reporting for non-null laboratories, National Animal Health Laboratory Network, I think, so many acronyms. But that requires that be reported. And then on June 4th, as Dr. Hayes said at the beginning, we had our first non-negative or case in a Minnesota dairy herd. And then the other change that took place was June 18th, we started requiring that lactating dairy cattle test negative for H5N1 before we exhibited. And like you said, I'm not sad to be done with exhibition season here. So even though there are still always ongoing events, the World Dairy Expo is coming here in Wisconsin. So reminder of what this looks like. The clinical presentation is somewhat general, which is not incredibly helpful. And there have been even cases where there have been asymptomatic, but the kind of most kind of consistent sign is that sudden drop in milk production with milk maybe having a caution-like appearance, but also seeing general signs like drop-in rumen intake or feed intake and rumen motility. Actually, what's interesting on our sites that we've seen is, I think what prompted testing was, you know, the fancy, monitoring programs that are on farm, noting that change in rumen motility. And that kind of has been in multiple cases, plus initiated the disease investigation for those veterinarians that then wanted to rule out H5N1. So we do see sometimes mild respiratory signs, but that doesn't seem to be the predominant sign. You know, again, some generalized signs, abnormal feces, off feed, all that good stuff. And we still are encouraging herds that exhibit any of those clinical signs to test to rule that out. I don't know if this is the order that I had one of the slides in. I must have moved it at some point. That's okay. But anyway, in June, which again now seems like ancient history, the USDA did publish an epi brief that kind of found some, you know, associated risk factors, and
think Sandy will go into a lot more of the epi, so I won't steal all that thunder. But in terms of what was found nationally, for risk factors for, how it seemed to move state to state, primarily seemed to be associated with movement of cattle. And in terms of intrastate, it seems that, shared visitors, personnel, seem to be an associated risk factor. And then another interesting finding that, we've seen on sites here in Minnesota and all over the country, that sick barn cats can kind of be the canary in the coal mine, and kind of perk ears out that something is going on at a farm, because in cats, it often shows up neurologically. So it can be a little extreme in that case. And then in terms of it's still kind of medium-ish morbidity, but low mortality disease. Though I think that 10% number they were finding nationally for our sites has been a bit different for morbidity, but giving a kind of situation of what the national picture has looked like. This one here on the left is the overall throughout the outbreak. So 207 confirmed cases with 14 states affected in the past 30 days. We've seen it in Idaho, California, and Michigan with 11 confirmed cases. So that's where the national is. And this I had thrown up there because I'm talking to some vet students tomorrow. So I was playing with EpiGrip. So this isn't super fancy. That box width is arbitrarily set to 7 days if you're an epi. But here's what the cases have kind of looked like nationally, with beginning of this being, mid-March and then today. So we're hoping, obviously not wanting it to kind of upward at the end there, but, we're wanting to be prepared for anything. So an update on where we are in terms of Minnesota. We have had 9 total affected dairy herds. All of these were found via diagnostic testing for clinical signs. So none of these have been due to pre-movement testing or pre-exhibition testing. Note the number there says 10 because of that goat event earlier this year, which we have talked about. And all but one of our quarantines have been released. So obviously the goal is to have all those released. Our last detected case was July 17th. Occasional, testing is still occurring, but that's what we want. We want that information. And so this is also from our website. So throughout this outbreak, this has been updated daily on our website. And then our response strategy. So we talked about earlier this spring, kind of what we were, thinking of doing, planning to doing, and how that's played out is, we have gone with the strategy of issuing quarantines, meaning that, kind of everything on the site, nothing really moving on or off, and requiring that there be biocontainment plans for sites so that we can ensure that the biosecurity practices are taking place. And then anything, any of the things listed on the quarantine, including, livestock, manure, dead stock, waste milk, that require approval from us to move on or off. And, that certain conditions would be met. And also as part of that, with MDA, there were herd milk management plans for each of those quarantine herds. And later we developed manure management plans as well, as often, waste milk being the kind of most high risk material, which often gets mixed in manure and still unknowns about transmission in manure. So that's why we brought in that manure management component. How the quarantines are lifted is the testing requirements being met. So there have to be 3 consecutive negative bulk tank tests that are collected at least 7 days apart. And on that last round of testing, also including all lactating animals that aren't contributing to that bulk tank. So that's the strategy we've been using to lift the quarantines are based on testing and that highly sensitive test that we have available. And how we've been managing all of this has been through our incident management team that
we're using for the poultry response as well. There are some different needs, so there were some different positions created. But it's been being managed that way. A lot of building the ship as we sail or however the idiom goes. But overall feeling, right now, in poultry and dairy, we haven't had any cases for a minute, so we're in the lower activation stage, but always ready to expand and contract that incident command system as needed to fit the response. The kind of the unknowns coming up and seasonality, bird migration, all of that. And then that's the primary update I had. I did want to leave a little bit of time for questions, since I find that a lot of people have had questions based on how often my phone's been ringing. But I'm open for questions, and hopefully I have answers for you. Yeah.
Question in the chat.
Perfect. Fine, good. Okay. I'll just stop sharing. Yes, good.
Question in the chat.
Question in the chat is, I'll read aloud. Are there any considerations for testing waste milk / any milk not slated for pasteurization to leave a farm, regardless of the status of the farm? What if unpasteurized milk is exposed to H5N1 after it leaves the animals? Okay, so there's a few parts to that. So are there any considerations for testing waste milk / milk not slated for pasteurization to leave a farm? So no, there's currently not anything like that in place. I know in some other states, I think Colorado and maybe Massachusetts, they put in, and again, I think it's from more bolting this mandatory surveillance testing. But I haven't heard of anything of that nature occurring, but that's an interesting thought, because obviously the waste milk would be, is the highest of concern. But like I said, a part of the milk management plans that the herds do, they do have to dispose of their waste milk in an approved way. I hope that answers your question. And what if unpasteurized milk is exposed after it leaves the animal? I'm not sure I understand the question, but then it would, if it's being collected from a healthy animal for pasteurization, then it would be pasteurized. And pasteurization is effective in inactivating the virus. I'm not sure if that's the question you had, but those are my answers. And you can type something clarifying if I didn't address your questions, but it's the idea.
Any other questions for Katie?
Yeah.
I get the feeling that last question is about if you have with some milk from a healthy animal sitting there, can the virus get in?
I mean, I guess we still are learning about in the survival time and the survival kinetics of the virus within different media, but I can imagine that I suppose it could, and then it would survive or it would, last in that media. It wouldn't replicate. But I guess technically, a lot of things could act as a fomite.
Probably wouldn't do any harm any more than just it being in this room.
Yeah, it would, just like on any other surface, but then pasteurization, fix that. Testing the raw milk without repeating her. Oh, okay, so I think maybe alluding to maybe producer concerns of if they test positive. I'm still not quite sure. Again.
I'm just wondering if she's referring to there's a FDA pilot.
Yeah.
Maybe Nikki could actually.
I can bring this over to you. Yeah, there is a pilot program USDA FDA are putting out that I think we're participating in.
Yeah, so the FDA, well, I'm Dr. Newton from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. I'm the Director of Dairy and Meat Inspection Division, so I've been actually involved in some of the work on the national side with the National Conference of Interstate Milk Shippers and the FDA to design a study, essentially a raw milk surveillance study where they would be sampling silos and tankers of milk to just try to get a sense of prevalence of the virus across the country. It would be a double-blinded study, so it wouldn't give us any, there'd be no farms directly implicated, because there would be no way to trace it back to the farm. So that's an advantage for the producer. It's kind of a disadvantage when we talk about what information we're going to be able to glean from the study, because we will have no information about regionally where the positives are. We will have nothing to go on and based on how that study's being set up. So I suppose about a month ago, the states all received a letter announcing this study and kind of asking for their voluntary participation. We do plan to participate in that study. That study is being held up right now by the Paperwork Reduction Act on the federal side. So I do not know when that study will start, but we're hoping for that to be relatively soon. And we would be involved in collecting those samples at the plant level. So either from silos at plants or from tankers. Anything else on any of that? All right, perfect. I will turn it over.
Hey, do we have Sandy Larson available?
Minnesota Department of Agriculture. And I've been working with the IMT on the HPAI response since 2022. When I got asked if I wanted to take a position doing a little emergency work within the Department of Ag, and we said, oh, nothing ever happens, you know, it's really pretty quiet. You should probably do some training on some ICS courses, and that has not been the case because I didn't get through the ICS courses when we started with the whole HPAI incidents. So today I'm going to talk to you about some epidemiology work that we did on the H5N1 influenza response, as that was my main role on the IMT. Yes. Okay, Katie already talked about this a little bit. She was talking about the mystery illness that was affecting animals. It did start in the panhandle of Texas in early February. And they were noticing some odd signs. She listed a lot of them. Some that she didn't say was maybe some animals had thick colostrum-like milk. And so that may have been a tip-off. And before they could figure out what it was, animals had already moved to New Mexico and Kansas, and they had animals with positive signs in those states. The USDA did confirm it on March 25th. It's found to be H5N1. And it was a spillover event from wild birds into cattle in Texas. It was a one-off, and after the spillover event into the cattle, it proceeded to move through the states through cattle movement. So in this movement, it started out with the Eurasian clade, the 4.4 2B, or no, actually that was probably 2.3.4B. And it mutated into a new genetic genotype, the B313 in cattle. And then they gave it a new name along with that. They called it H5 influenza in dairy cattle, because obviously it can't be HPAI because they're not birds. So this slide kind of depicts the actual, it's not actual movements, but it does depict on how this virus spread really rapidly and throughout the United States through cattle movements. So here in Minnesota, we had our first confirmed farm on June 4th. We're not really sure when it arrived in the state, but that's when we had our first confirmed farm. We did have 9 farms, 4 were in Benton County, 1 was Sibley, 1 in Morrison, and 1 each in Candy, Ojai, and Lincoln. And Stearns. So I don't know, I pulled a little bit different map than Katie. Hers said 207 cases. My national picture shows that to date there are 203 confirmed cases with 14 states affected. Like she said, most recently, they have been in California and Michigan. So the USDA and their state partners have been working furiously trying to determine how the H5N1 has been being transmitted. We've done this through a number of different methods. We've used epidemiology questionnaires. We've undertaken sampling on farms, more accurately, the USDA probably did. We've sampled wild birds and rodents and other animals on the farms, and then they utilized a lot of genetic sequencing. But a large part of our response was to actually go on site and do interviews on farm for epidemiology, looking for links and looking at the farms themselves. The epidemiologist would visit with the case manager and we'd go through our very long questionnaire, just trying to put together the pieces of the puzzle on how this virus has been being spread. So first thing that we do when we get there is put on a bunch of PPE. And then we're going to go and look at the general layout of the farm. Are there any other dairy farms next to the dairy farm affected? Are there poultry farms that close by? What's their feed storage? Is it accessible to wild birds? Water source, same thing. Can the wild birds get in there? And the feed storage, is it open to rodents or maybe even feral cats that might be spreading the virus around? And then we're going to ask a lot of questions about the lagoon and manure storage. What's the location? How long does it stay in that lagoon? What's your practice for spreading it when the manure or the liquid, once you get it out of these holding facilities, what do you put in there? Are you putting in waste milk? Is there wastewater? Are there animal tissues in there? We'll look at animal housing. Is it one pen in particular that was affected with the cattle, or is it maybe 2 pens close by each other and it started in one and maybe moved to the other through direct contact? We're also going to look at other animals on the farm. Is anything else showing any signs of infection or looking sick like the cats, as Katie's talking about? The big thing we want to do is try to paint a picture of animal movement and people and equipment on and off farms, because this has been identified as the biggest way that the virus is moving. So we're going to ask a lot of questions about cattle movement. And I think one thing we found out is through this is that dairy cattle move a lot. Somebody may be sending their calves to Kansas and they may be getting spring heifers from Texas. And there's just a lot of cattle movement that we were really unaware of. So we tried to put all those pieces together and get it all down on paper. We're going to look at people moving on and off the affected farms. Do you have an inseminator coming out? Are there somebody coming to transport the cull cows? Are they stopping at other farms along the way? Do you have employees that are working at multiple farms? We're going to look at equipment that might be shared between other facilities. How are they cleaning that between facilities? Are they cleaning it at all? We're also going to look at wild bird presence on the farm, even though we've identified that that does not seem to be the way it's spreading. It's still something we're taking note of. You know, things change as we learn more information. So what did we learn through all this? We learned that the spread of H5N1 interstate and intrastate is linked to cattle movements, not on wild bird introductions. In some states, there's been more spread locally through normal business operations. I think I was already talking about that. Employees, inseminators, transporters who might visit multiple farms and have contact with affected cattle. Spread on dairy farms has also been seen to be cow to cow. There's some evidence that there might be some spread through milking equipment, as well as direct cow to cow transmission. So in Minnesota, we have had, as Katie said, 18 detections in poultry. 17 of those were commercial turkey. I think there was 3 breeder hens, 1 breeder tom, 12 commercial meat birds, and the 1 breeder flock that was not B313. Everything else has been B313. We also had 2 chickens flocks. 1 was a commercial layer farm and 1 was a backyard flock that had chickens, and 9 dairy farms that had this B313. So how is the B313 virus getting to the poultry flocks? How are they contracting it from dairy cattle? Well, what we do know is that poultry are very, very susceptible to HPAI, and that cattle produce a lot of it in their milk. I did hear a talk once where somebody said that even a drop of milk on somebody's sweatshirt could, and then if they went into a poultry barn, could be enough to start the infection in the whole flock. So they're very sensitive. What we don't know is how the virus is getting into the poultry barn. In Minnesota, we do have strong epidemiological links between some farms indicating the virus may have been spread through spreading of manure, even though feces has not been determined to be a route of shedding. There's a lot of things in that manure, like I was talking about before. It could be urine, which they do shed it somewhat urine, waste milk, wastewater, other animal tissues. So this might be how it's getting closer to poultry farms, just from the normal day-to-day operations. In other states, they found that employees on poultry farms sometimes had second jobs, and they may have been working on another dairy farm or at a dairy farm in addition to a poultry farm, or vice versa. And that may be how it was being spread. And in other places, we didn't really have this here, but there was some living situations in other states where poultry and dairy workers were living together. So this is a timeline of the onset of clinical signs in Minnesota. And the top, on the top here, we have all the turkey farms. And the yellow on the bottom are the dairies, and the 2 gray are the 2 commercial, or the commercial table egg layer and a backyard flock. So what we do know is that from meager 13 over there, it arrived on, or at least by April 9th. So we know that the herd incubation time is about 12 to 21 days at the herd level for H5N1 or the B313. And so that puts us really, our first herd got infected, our first dairy cattle herd probably got infected somewhere in the end of March. And it might even been before we had the positive confirmed by USDA of the Texas herd. And that hypothesis is supported by our epi questionnaires, genome sequencing, and timeline data. This slide. Yep.
So those dairy farms, how close are they to the poultry? Like, there's like in the same county, are they distant enough away from each other, close to each other?
It really varied.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a lot of variation. And then we can't say where they were, so.
Right. Thank you.
So, viral sequencing was performed at NBSL in Iowa. And, they did find that Minnesota's origins from the testing herds were from Kansas and South Dakota herds that had tested positive. So whole genomic sequencing data and several indirect epi-links suggest multiple unreported, untested Minnesota dairies may have been involved in the introduction of the V313 into Minnesota. And then further dissemination into other positive herds and then flocks. Anecdotal reports from epi interviews definitely alluded to that fact too, that there was unreported herds, because people in town seemed to know maybe who was who and what was going on, but so in other industry and laboratory partners also reported that they had found that 60 to 90% of dairy herds probably weren't reporting, and I think that's something that they found to be true here as well. Overall, epi investigations revealed no confirmed animal movements or direct epi links to confidently verify the route of introduction to the positive prems, except where a prem was owned or managed by similar people and they moved animals in between and shared personnel. So explain a little bit about this slide. This big green circle, that shows us a poultry cluster of all prems that were positive that were of similar genomic sequencing. And in this blue circle, those are all, that's a dairy cluster. The orange lines are cattle movement and the light blue lines are direct genomic links, or maybe not direct, but genomic links. There might be a few things different that suggest that there's some untested dairies in between. So you can see this one's a really huge cluster, and you were asking me about how close things were. Well, Stearns County and Lyons County are directly genomic linked, and they're quite a ways away from each other. So unfortunately, we didn't have no data yet to tell us exactly how got from Stearns County to Lyons County. Katie also said this: a lot of cats have been affected by the H5N1. They ranged in science from respiratory to neurological to death, so they might be an early indicator on farms of an H5N1 infection. So something to watch for. So in summary, H5N1 was likely introduced to Minnesota through lactating animal movement in mid to late March. A lot of dairies remain unreported and untested, and this leaves large gaps in our knowledge of how the disease was spreading. We still have a lot to learn about the transmission of the disease, and many studies are ongoing through government and private entities, and we'll continue to gain perspective on spread as we hear about those results. Any questions? Mackenzie, are you wanting to help me?
I am here if you need anything.
Yeah. Carrie Kramer's Jenny O. I do want to preface this that I have been a dairy vet and currently own dairy with my husband. So I do understand a little bit of what I'm asking when I say this. And this is also more maybe like a plea than a question, but just to as you said, we have a lot to learn about this disease. Is there thoughts as we move forward, looking at other things to try to understand the transmission, how to protect both cattle and poultry? Is there extra surveillance testing? For example, if a poultry farm goes positive in your control area, is there cattle testing that we can do in those control areas? Or if a dairy herd goes positive, is there poultry farms around that dairy farm that can do testing?
is there other ways that we could also keep looking going forward? So more of a plea to like keep looking at this, to keep understanding it, and I guess to have that discussion, I guess.
I'm just gonna hand this microphone, Brian, because I think that sounds like your question.
Great question, Carrie. Good question. No, I don't mean to be facetious about that. That's been a struggle with this. This has been a learning curve. I think Katie mentioned we're building the ship as we sail, and that's been nationwide. And part of the confusion, part of the frustration, there's been a lot. Communication has been somewhat horrendous, and I think my colleagues, and not to call Stacy, but I think just amongst all of our agencies, we're getting information kind of piecemeal, and we end up sharing, what we find out. It's not what someone else heard, and then we get anecdotal information from the field, which that's usually as much information as we're getting through official routes. So frustration. So my intent was, once this, so there's some nuances to this disease because it's not a reportable disease. I don't have the authority to impose some of the restrictions that we do with the poultry case. So there's obviously a very sophisticated surveillance that we are allowed to do and we're required to do to allow poultry producers to be eligible for indemnity. So I state that, we'll do that as soon as we get our first case in dairy cattle in Minnesota. But our statute doesn't allow me to do that because again, it's not a reportable disease. So it remains kind of a voluntary surveillance. So trying to encourage dairy farmers to test their cattle that have signs, trying to encourage dairy veterinarians to report clinical signs and that would allow us to initiate some testing. So I know where your frustration is coming from. I don't know to your level, but it's been frustrating at the agency level too, because there's more we know how to do, but we have to do it by the right route. So, and a couple of those routes that would give the agency the ability to do that would be declaring it a national emergency. So I'll go, top end. So if USDA would decide this is a reportable disease in dairy cattle, that gives us a lot of opportunity to enforce more active surveillance. There's a lot of reasons. I kind of alluded to this earlier during my summary. There's a lot of reasons why the USDA is reluctant to go that route. When you label something reportable, trading partners start to question, why is this reportable? Is this something we need to worry about? There's a lot of consumer angst that goes along with that, and obviously it's angst for the dairy industry because there's a misconception that can go along with that. So bring it more to a local level. The governor can issue an executive order, similar to what we saw during the COVID outbreak. There were a lot of executive orders that were imposed that our agency had to adhere to for livestock events, and it was related to human health, but we were required to follow this. For a variety of reasons, the governor didn't feel it was necessary to go that route. I think I shouldn't say it like that. I can't speak for him, but the way the cases were kind of coming out, I think we expected kind of an explosion of dairy cases. When we got those first, I thought we were going to just see this break wide open and likely go down that route, but it was more of a trickle effect. And on the outside, I don't think it actually was. I think there's underlying cases, as Sandy mentioned, that have just gone undiagnosed. So then another level is to our board of directors can have a special meeting to determine, is this something that we are going to ask our agency to do? It's either a statutory change or the board of directors has to have a special meeting, emergency meeting, so to speak, to discuss this exact topic at a public meeting to go that route. So I've been communicating with the board members, with Erica in particular, just to kind of discuss where we're at with this and trying to see how intense the situation gets. In the meantime, we asked for some help from the USDA. We brought in the Indigo team first and then the Blue team to kind of give us a little bit of a reprieve on the state side, but also to use some of their federal jurisdiction to do more of the epidemiologic research and trying to get some more of that information. So I'm throwing a lot of explanations out there, not meant to be excuses, but I don't think we're opposed to taking that, and now I'm speaking for the board, I should, but those are certainly routes that are available to producers. If it feels like we're not getting the answers we need in a timely fashion, those are your avenues to be able to influence that. Now, the caveat to that is the dairy industry gets to weigh in on that as well. So it's a public meeting, and we have a very candid discussion between both industries to determine how are we going to proceed, and the board fortunately gets to make that decision. I get to hide behind that I'm just the state vet. I don't make the decisions, but I enforce the decisions that my board of directors make. So that kind of, I mean, that's the discussion I think you're trying to initiate here. What initiates having those kinds of, or at what point do we convene that kind of meeting? I think, I'll play Pollyanna here and say it's all done, and then I know it's not. We're really concerned. What's the fall migration look like, and where does that take us? So I don't think this has been discussed yet, but this virus has not been detected in migratory waterfowl. So that's a great thing. Of all the states that have done research and looked at paradomestic species, all the birds and critters that have been tested on farms, it's never been in a migratory waterfowl. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen. And then what happens when that virus gets there? So I think we're all on eggshells a little bit on what happens. I mean, the migration has started. So when will this transfer to those birds, and then where does it go? So now I'm kind of random. Do you want to take that farther? More questions? Board members want to talk?
I guess, you bring up a point that this board could have called a meeting. I think the fact we don't have a dairy veterinarian board or a dairy producer on the board has left us somewhat not realizing that maybe we should have done something. You know what I'm saying?
I do, but I think that would have been initiated more from the poultry industry than from the dairy industry. So I think that the dairy industry would have been left to respond, and we would have had people such as Lucas, Extension, representing the dairy industry.
And then say, so your communication with Erica could have raised the flag that we all need to get.
It would actually have to come from the industry. So I'm having those discussions with Erica, but the industry would need to initiate that.
Yeah, it's, for those online, Lucas shows from Minnesota. I'll just say, we have 3 agencies involved in this response. Unlike other species, we also have the Department of Agriculture. So between Commissioner Petersen and persons who report to him, not Sandy specifically, but others, Dr. Hoefs, and then Dr. Holzbauer. I mean, we've been in contact before things were official, and I expect we will continue to be in contact, unfortunately. And I check in with my board of directors and other farmers often. And I guess what I would say is, and I've said very publicly, very, very many times, like, I don't think we should be surprised by the response of dairy farmers testing. The incentives provided by USDA have been very anti-test. The information out there and the response, I think, from the industry as a whole has been very do not test. So I think if Dr. Larson's numbers are right, which I have no reason to believe that they aren't, and you do the math, like this is a case study in sociology. Like if we provide these incentives and this happens, what will farmers do? And I think this is what we'd end up with. The dairy industry would not ask for anything more from the state. I think what we're concerned about, and we've seen a lot, and I think if you talk to our livestock markets, and to the credit Dr. Hoefs, Commissioner Petersen, National FSA Director, the markets in the corners of our states have been put on islands and suffered, especially at the beginning when we didn't know all the rules, suffered immensely. And the dairy farmers and cattle farmers in the corners of our states suffered in the same way. So putting us on an island, I think, is a bigger concern because of where livestock are, because of where cattle are in Minnesota. And so when our cattle go back and forth on the Wisconsin border and South Dakota border and Iowa border constantly and North Dakota border a little bit, not to mention the regular movements of heifers to southern states where they can be better cared for sometimes. It's just putting us on an island, I think, is the biggest concern, and that is why I think you saw the testing response that you saw or lack thereof, because the incentives aren't there, and we have not asked for more as a dairy industry because doing something different than the states next to us, one, causes confusion, but two, causes great business risk. And until like hopefully today, like profitability of the dairy industry has been unseen for the past 5-6 years. But hopefully today going forward, you guys just start getting wild amounts for milk and cheese and everything's great and crop prices are down. And that's somewhat of funny, facetious comment, but it's true. Like it's just been very, very difficult that whole cattle have been the only lifeline to keep cash flow for much of the last 12 to 16 months. And so when the incentives were, hey, we're going to potentially limit your only profitable enterprise in your farm if you just test, that made it very, very difficult, I think, for a lot of farmers to even think about it. They didn't really weigh the pros and cons. They just saw that and said, well, I'm not even going to think about this because this is the only good thing I have going at the time. So I think that's why you didn't see much of this. That was hopefully a lot of comments to help Gary, Dr. Dave's comments.
Good afternoon, Jose Rojas with JNO. Just to add, maybe backtrack a little bit. First of all, thank you to the board. This last 3 years been super intense, right? 3 years in a row with H5N1 and double whammy this year with AI and pneumovirus, right? So we cannot forget that has been intense. So thank you for the board and all NBCs involved. But I do see the opportunity for the state of Minnesota to provide leadership on a case that is very, very complicated. 3 agencies involved, multi-industry, and how can we elevate the conversation to really be the leaders among the US to say, how are we going to get this done? We have a lot to stake. We alone lost over 500,000 birds this year alone. So as we heard, the dairy impact is, I don't want to minimize it, but it's less when it hits birds, they don't survive, And yeah, we get indemnity, but it's really a big impact to our industry. So how can we continue the conversation just like we're having now? Do we have more meetings? Do we innovate? How can we be more proactive versus reactive and just kind of at a distance, see what's happening and then react? Because of our connection with the turkey industry here, the dairy industry here, I think we have a big opportunity to show the rest of the country how we do it in Minnesota. So I just want to elevate the conversation to that level, see how we continue having these dialogue to really have transparency. We have a farm that's 3 miles away from here. If that farm gets AI, they will know because we have a control zone and they know. If nothing happens, but if a farm nearby gets AI, we will know. But there are things we could do. We could redirect traffic, feed birds in if we were just know, but not knowing really ties our hands to protect each other, not only the poultry industry, but there. So that's the discussions that I wish we could have to elevate, helping each other really. And it's not about pointing fingers and blame. It's how do we collectively attack this better and be a model for the rest of the country. That's what it's.
Thank you. That's a good comment.
I just want to mention too, that at the MDA, we do have a new protect grant for livestock, protecting from influenza. There's one note that we have $500,000 available for this. Operating between $500,000 and $10,000 per fund operation for this. So it's be eligible, for example, it could be lasers to scare birds away, isolation times, truck washes, injection systems, etc. So I just want to mention that there's some funding out there that's really open. This will close, patient calls on third section of 31st. So it's not like there's not enough funds to use right now to help them set up some protection on the virus.
And I did want to thank you for that statement, Jose. I think Minnesota is recognized nationally as how to do things right. And we keep getting questions, how are you doing things? Dr. Voss and I have been asked to speak about metapneumovirus for folks up in California because they just assume Minnesota does it right. Same thing, Michigan has contacted us to wonder, how are you attacking this disease with respect to exhibitions? So I think you're right. I think Minnesota is at a point that we're poised to be leaders. And I think the key is just keeping the communication open. And I commend Lucas and the dairy industry for coming to the table and continuing to have this conversation. So I think that needs to keep happening, and we need to see some activity, some actions that show we're working together at this, so we can again demonstrate Minnesota knows how to do it. So thank you, Sandy. Well, thanks for your report, Sandy.
We do need to keep moving. Heather, it looks like Heather's next. Thank you for all those comments. Those are warranted, and know that we've heard you. And that's all we can touch in moving as we need to the call. So Heather, we are ready for you.
All right. I'm sorry I couldn't be there with you today. I was planning on it, but one of my kids had different plans. So here I am. I'm Dr. Heather Damico. I'm the senior veterinarian in charge of the Farm Cervid program. And I'm just going to do a quick update on our fencing, our new statutory changes for fencing. Oh, and now my computer is stuck. Come on, computer. Oh, there you go. Okay. So as you all know, there were some legislative changes in 2023 that went into effect on September 1st of this year that require a physical barrier between wild cervidae and farmed cervidae. So since then, since that legislative change, we found out about it, we have been working on how we're going to deal with this. So we have developed this farmed cervidae fencing plan form. We developed a form with some examples of how to accomplish this, some different ways people can do it that have been approved in the past. And we've also had many different ways of doing it that our producers have come up with as well. So we provided some examples, but we have not been really prescriptive in what people can and cannot do with their farmed cervidae exclusionary fencing because there are a lot of different ways to do it. So we got this fencing panel together, and we've had people filling out this fencing plan form, and then they submit that into the office, and we go over that with our team. Our plan panel, our review panel is composed of Board of Animal Health employees, both field staff and office staff, and also USDA. So we go over those every Wednesday morning. And once they're approved, we enter those into Core 1. So then our field inspectors can look at those and use those to be able to verify the fence when they go out and do their inspections. So we have this exclusionary fence inspection that it's only for this year because this is new. So going forward, that will just be part of our normal annual inspection process. But we had some people that have already done their annual inspections prior to September 1st. So we wanted to make sure that we did have another inspection that we could verify that people are in compliance with the new statutory requirements. So if we have a fencing plan that was approved prior to their inspection, then the field inspector just verifies that the fencing plan matches what they see in the field when they do their inspection. And if there is no fencing plan that was submitted prior to the inspection, then the inspector goes ahead and helps the producer fill out a form, and then they submit that back to the office, and we go through our normal process with the fencing panel. There's a couple of reasons that we do that. The main one is consistency. We want to make sure that we are going through the same process with everybody's fencing to make sure that we're being consistent in how we approve or disapprove these fencing plans. So every plan is submitted and we go through all of them. And then we upload all of them into Core 1, again, for documentation, so we can say that we have verified that this is what they're doing for their fence. I meant to talk about that picture. This is, so throughout, I'm just going to intersperse some pictures of what has been, some things that have been submitted to us. So in this case, this blue line is their 8-foot fence. And then they actually have their exclusionary fence on the inside of their enclosure to keep their animals away from their primary 8-foot fence. Some of the types of exclusionary fencing that are on our examples would be a double 8-foot fence or a secondary coupled fence where they have a space of 12 inches between their primary 8-foot fence and a secondary wire mesh fence usually that has a space in between, so there can be no nose-to-nose contact between wild and farmed cervidae. Solid fencing has been a pretty popular option for a lot of people, whether they're using wood or shade cloth or things to prevent a physical barrier as a solid option. We also have some people using electric fence, and a lot of people are using a combination of multiple different kinds of fencing. So this picture would be an example of a double 8-foot fence. It doesn't look like it from this perspective, but those are 8-foot fences. In this picture, you can see on the right, this is an example of a shade cloth type material that people will use as a physical barrier, a solid physical barrier. So it has to be a densely woven shade cloth. We do have people submit examples, pictures, or examples of, some people are getting it off of Amazon or from Menards or whatever, and they'll send us a picture of that product so we can verify that it is dense enough. There are some shade cloths that are not very dense, and those wouldn't qualify for this requirement. So this particular producer has a combination of electric and shade cloth. This would be an example of a really good example of electric. So in this example, they've set posts just outside of their 8-foot fence, and then they actually used cutoffs on the bottom 2 wires of that electric fence in case in the wintertime the snow gets higher so that doesn't trip out the fence. So there's been a lot of thought that goes into these exclusionary fence builds from producers, and they're doing a great. So for our herds, currently we have 71 non-white-tailed deer herds and 13 of white-tailed deer mixed herds. Since January, we've had 13 producers get out. And this doesn't include any white-tailed deer exclusive, because again, those are not the concern of the DNR. So these are only the herds that we have jurisdiction over. So 13 have gotten out, and there's 9 more that have told us that they're planning on getting out before the end of the year. And most of those, the vast majority of those, are citing the expense of putting up new fencing, among other things. So, but it's mostly these legislative changes that are causing those producers to get out. Right now we have 48 approved of those producers that we had, so 84 total producers still. 48 have approved fencing plans. We have 3 to go over tomorrow morning at our weekly meeting, and 24 that we don't have completed plans or they've not submitted anything that we're anticipating the inspectors will have to help them fill out those plans when they do their inspection. We have 12 exclusionary fencing inspections that have been done. And again, the DNR inspects all enclosures that house white-tailed deer. So any of our mixed animal producers, if they move, some of them will move species between pens. So then the DNR would inspect all of those pens if they have the potential to house white-tailed deer. And some producers don't ever move their animals between pens. So then our staff would inspect those non-white-tailed deer pens. And the DNR would inspect the white-tail ones. Any questions? Wow, you guys are letting me off easy.
I have one quick question, and I don't know if you know the answer to it, Heather, but Earlier this past, was it spring? Or no, I think it was last year, they had the first livestock protection grant, and that was available to cervid producers. Do you know how many of your cervid producers got funding for that, for fencing?
I know there were a few. There were also some white-tailed deer producers that got funding. I don't know how many.
Okay.
I think a lot of people did not apply for it because they didn't really know what they were doing with it yet, as far as what they were going to do for their fencing. And there was a $10,000 cap, which is better than nothing. But a lot of these, a lot of the larger fencing projects they're significantly larger than that.
Sure, that makes sense. Thank you. Any other questions or? Okay. All right, Heather, thank you for your time.
Thanks.
Here's 11 minutes. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for having me. Erik Jopp, Assistant Director. I'll be talking about the US SHIP program, and then there was a recent House of Delegates meeting here in Bloomington about 2 weeks ago. So I think I'm the last one here before we get our tour of Lucas's great facilities here. So okay, so a little bit about the US SHIP program. It's a swine program, voluntary program as of right now, and probably always will be. And it's a pilot program that has been developed around the idea of the National Poultry Improvement Program, or the NPIP, that Shauna has talked quite extensively about. And the impetus behind it is to monitor for ASF or CSF, so African swine fever and classical swine fever. This project started about 4 years ago with the idea of, okay, if we do have an incursion of ASF, which is in the Dominican Republic and Haiti as we speak, how would the US respond, and how would we keep our markets open? So a little bit of the diagram of how this is being set up. As I said, it's a voluntary program, both for both producers and states at this time. So there are official state agencies that administer the program. Program participants who are mainly the producers. Packers are starting to get on board now as well, as far as getting certifications for the US SHIP program. And then the information that's brought into that program, how do we get that back out to in a useful way? So is that packers certifying that their animals coming in are free of disease? Is it state animal health officials tracking animals? So a lot of different things so that it can potentially do. And then USDA is in this diagram right now. They're not currently officially involved, but they're in the process. I'll get into that a little bit more later. So like I said, this is a pilot project modeled after the NPIP program. They're modeling it after that as far as the disease monitoring and surveillance. NPIP is a program that's been in use. I believe it's going to be celebrating 90 years coming up here very shortly. So currently there are 36 states participating in the US SHIP program, which accounts for about 2/3 of the US swine population as being involved. Currently, right now, Minnesota has 56 farms or companies enrolled. That accounts for about 5.3 million pigs within the state of Minnesota. One of the main things that US SHIP was trying to do is get what they call a repository of data. So you can access it in different ways. We did struggle with this a little bit at the state level because of the statutes that we have. The producers that signed up actually enter biosecurity plans. They do premise ID numbers for all of their sites, a lot of different information. But our statutes in Minnesota didn't allow us to share those PIN numbers into this repository. We did work with our attorney while she was here to get that figured out. We ended up having to go to each producer individually and have them verify that we could share that information. But all we are sharing is that PIN information. We're not sharing any other valuable data as well. So what happens then is that PIN number and some of the status of either ASF or CSF monitoring would go into this database. And then the end users who would potentially have access to that database could look at a specific PIN number or site to say, okay, are they enrolled in this program? And if they are enrolled, what is the disease status of that site? And I think we were talked about that. So basically monitoring for ASF, CSF as it sits right now, and that'll probably expand as the program continues to grow. So here's a diagram of the states across the country that are involved in the program. The white states are not involved in the program. The green shaded states are ones that are participating and actually actively putting those pins into that repository. North Dakota is one that was similar to us. They're still working on getting that okayed by their producers so they can actually put that information in. So overall, it's been being implemented fairly well across the U.S. The yellow is pending, so they have not put any information in yet. The blue ones are actually states that are participating, but they don't have any producers that are participating. So they're participating at the state level, but no actual producers that have. Yep, thanks for that question. So that was a little bit about the program itself. Like I said, it's a pilot program that started in about 2020. They've had 4 House of Delegates meetings to bring this program forward to as it's being established, working out as many kinks as they can and getting it solidified for potential takeover by USDA. So the House of Delegates meeting, which Brandon was part of here this past 2 weeks ago, Dr. Hoefs, and I believe Dr. Naikare was actually there for part of the time as well. There were roughly 300 people that attended it was over 3 days. There were breakout sessions of discussions of proposed standards, resolutions. So program standards are some of the requirements of the program. So kind of could look at those as being the rules of the program, things to follow. Resolutions are the things that they're looking at to see, okay, could we make this program better? What are things that we can look at to implement? How do we keep records? How do we share records, movements, those types of things? So a lot of the more of the exploratory types of things as resolutions to either start new things to look at or continue things that have been in the process already. So there is also a general conference committee that oversees and kind of leads the US SHIP program. It's broken into regions across the US, 6 different regions, and there's a representative from each region that serves on that committee, as well as 3 others. So one from exhibition swine, harvest facilities, and then an at-large position. So Minnesota is in the north central region, along with North and South Dakota. Iowa, with the amount of pigs that they have, has their own region actually. So it's based on swine numbers, across the state of how they put these regions together. Representative for Region 3, which Minnesota belongs to, is Mike Walker, producer here in Minnesota, and he was just reelected to serve again. So very glad to have him, and he's been the chairman of this committee as well. So very, very instrumental in getting this process going and keeping it going. Throughout that meeting, each state is delegated so many voting members. Again, based on the participation in the U.S. program of how many producers and how many animals are enrolled in that program. Minnesota had 13 voting members. I believe we were number 3 in the country as far as number of voting members. Iowa being first, followed by North Carolina and then us. So we had 13 of the voting members out of a total of 249. A lot of the meeting just revolved around, like I said, those resolutions and program standards. They also had a lot of discussion about this being transferred and what it will look like when it becomes a USDA official program. The plan is for USDA to have this, what's considered a codified program, probably within the next 12 to 18 months. They haven't necessarily put a timeline on it, but they're working in the rules process right now to getting it proposed to become an official program. So biosecurity, traceability, and disease surveillance are the 3 pillars of the U.S. program. And each one of those is very integral. And if we do have an incursion of ASF or whatever it ends up being, that we would have the biosecurity in place to keep it from spreading very rapidly. Traceability, so we can tell, where animals are moving. And then the disease surveillance of knowing where that disease is and where it isn't. And if we can have this all in place, it would help continuity of business for trading partners around the country. One of the things with it being taken over as a USDA official program is other countries will recognize this program more than what it is right now. As I said, USDA is in the process of getting a team put together to take over the program. So there's a handful of those, and some of those people have been very instrumental in doing what's already been happening with this program. With that ends my official. So any questions?
So for the repository database, where the information is being flooded on participants and program status, would that be public by the MPI information for?
The question is if that repository would be a public thing.
Correct.
As far as I know right now, you would have to have access to that repository. So general public would not necessarily have access. Did you have?
The point of the repository is for regulatory officials to access it for movement records. If there's a traceability issue, then they would have an easier route to get there versus trying to track down those movement records. So it wouldn't be public, but it would be available to regular.
I guess. And as Dr. Jopp mentioned, I've been part of this program since its inception. Would have been in 2021, I guess it was, is when the first House of Delegates happened. But kind of the intriguing thing is we as a pig industry are really trying to keep this a producer and industry-led process that is ultimately supported and adopted by the USDA to act on our behalf internationally to remain open to trade in the event we appears in foreign animal disease. And the 2 that we're targeting today, many others might develop in due time. But probably the other thing that that we as an industry now have put in form of a resolution is also to begin the attack on endemic disease within this country. So it's a really heavy lift. Jose, you mentioned in the state of Minnesota, being able to put forth our best foot to be a leader. It was the Minnesota pork industry that brought that resolution forward to the national delegate body. With a bit of angst as to whether or not we were going to be celebrated or condemned for bringing such an effort, because it's going to require some, in order to achieve the goals of the resolution sets out to accomplish, it's going to require exactly what you just described, is neighbor to neighbor communication, state to state communication, producer to packer, truck driver to farm manager, all those things are going to be paramount in order to accomplish that. And it also goes all the way back to our diagnostic laboratories to understand the status of each and every farm in the country. Because we can't be willy-nilly going about the countryside spreading things from place to place, not knowing for sure what's going on in the side vents of the trailer. So I guess maybe not to step back in our agenda, but I would agree that we as a state, and I would be interested to know and be relatively new as a director here at Board of Animal Health, what is our option or our best mode of action to take and put our best foot forward to be a leader within our barnyard industries, as well as within our national agricultural industry, because at the end of the day, there's going to come that day of reckoning. And I guess I like to refer to a lot of things that a lot of critical moments in time comes whispers, and far too many are recognized for, far too many are not recognizing that they become a scream. We've got a whisper today between industries that if we don't respond today, I'm afraid it's going to become a screaming moment that in history will look like we should have responded. 2020 isn't as easy as we look back. And I think today we got the whisper, time is now to respond. And US chip is just an example of another industry that's doing that on their own behalf. Make sure we don't wait for that screaming moment.
Anything else? All right. Thank you. The next.
Very quickly, I just have a message for the rest of the board. Before Stacy left, we got the bylaws pretty much in the final form. And just been on enough time to do something about it this evening, but I'll be sending out a copy to all the board members. Take a look, we can still maintain this, and then in December, we will get up to the vote. Accept these bylaws.
Okay, so with that, before we adjourn, we need to pick our December meeting date. Dr. Hawkins says anytime. Does the 17th work for everyone? Oh, no, okay. The third or the seventh? Yeah. The third or the seventh is either of those. So December 10th, Tuesday, December 10th will be our next meeting. Okay, is there a motion to adjourn the meeting? There's a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. All say aye. Motion carried. The meeting is done. Thank you all for attending. Lucas, anything about the tutor?